All right, everybody. Lynn's having some technical difficulties, so we're pulling a little bit of an audible, but worst case scenario is I can cover the slides she was going to present. So as I noted in my email to everybody, I wanted just to lay down some ground rules. First, we're going to start off by opening meetings. I'll start off as the SBC chair. I'll pass it off to the individual committees to open their meetings. And then they'll pass it back to me. We'll go through some ground rules, some legalese, and just as I noted, try to stay muted as much as possible unless you want to speak, just so we don't have too much background noise. You know, be patient with everybody. We're all working through kind of some strange times here. And so I appreciate everybody's patience and flexibility. So I will start off by opening a meeting of the school building committee, and we have a quorum present. Just want to go through my list here. Present are myself, Chairman Mike Quinlan. We have Tim Bonfatti, Walter Kincaid, Mike Weber, Jeff Marsden, Anna Mae O'Sheabrook, Leo Brem, Mike Marcucci. As voting members, as non-voting members, we have Mike LaFrancesca, Stephen Graham, Sharon Tatro, and Christine Trevor. So with that, I'll hand it off to Gus Murphy as chair of the board of selectmen.
Okay, hello, this is Gus Murphy, chair of the Medfield Board of Selectmen. I'm joined by my two fellow selectmen, Pete Peterson and Mike Marcucci, doing double duty, I guess, as both a member of your committee and a member of our committee.
And we're thankful for that. Next, I'll hand it off to Anna Mae O'Sheabrook as chair of the Medfield School Committee.
Hi there. I opened the Medfield School Committee meeting on this special meeting event on April the 7th. Present are Jessica Riley, Leo Brem, Megan Glenn, and Tim Knight.
And Mike Pastore as chair of the Medfield Warrant Committee. You gotta unmute Mike. Mike.
Yep. No, I did that, so that was good. So let's try that again. Mike Pastore from Medfield Warrant Committee, joined by Newton Thompson, Bob Sliney, Jeremy Marset. Who else is on here? Amanda Hall, Sharon Tatro, Christine Martin, and Joanna Hilbert.
Okay. Next up, I just want to read one thing for the record. Bear with me for a second. So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law Chapter 30A, paragraph 18, and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen, School Building Committee, Warrant Committee, and School Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. Reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. So I'll just want to follow up with a little bit of further detail on that. The way I anticipate this going is that we will be, I also should note that this is live streaming on YouTube as well for everybody, and it is being recorded. So as I noted in my email to the group last night, we're going to be doing a presentation that'll be led by the school building committee and the superintendent, our architects, Arrow Street, and hopefully if we can get Lynn on the OPM from left field. Otherwise, I will supplement some of her slides. At each section of that presentation, because it's a lot of information, we'll be stopping to pause, and I will recognize the chairs from each committee to poll their members for any questions, and we will respond to questions accordingly. At the end, we will also be opening up the question and answer session to the general public. We request that questions be submitted through the Q&A section. We will take them as best we can, try to answer them live tonight, or if possible, we may need to follow up with further answers if we don't have the full answers tonight. Before I jump in, does anybody have any questions on that process from the panels? Not hearing any. I think, Larry, do you have the presentation?
I'll put it up on my screen. Just give me a second to, there we go. Yep, there we go. So hopefully folks can see the introductory page.
All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight in these crazy times and meeting virtually. This is kind of a unique situation in these unsettling and historic times we're living in. That said, we are trying to keep this project moving forward as best we can. And one of the critical meetings that we had discussed prior to all this COVID-19 craziness was getting all of these committees and boards together to discuss what's probably the most important decision that we'll make as a town in regards to this project, largely having to do with reconfiguration and which ultimately sets the enrollment size for the building project and which one we pursue. We've been invited by the MSBA to participate with 2 study options. There's been a good amount of work done, but ultimately we're going to be looking for feedback and guidance from the leadership of the town that's gathered here today. So our goal here today is to get through this, present the information, and then to talk about the process of how we get to a decision. Ultimately, that decision, whatever it is, we really, as we've done in the building committee in the past, we really want to get consensus as much as possible. We want everybody to support the decision. And certainly the MSBA is going to be looking for that as well, because they want to ensure that the town is really united behind the direction. So next slide. So this is the agenda we've got presented for tonight. We're going to walk through the basics of the MSBA process for those that haven't been keeping a close eye on this. And then Dr. Marsden is going to present the educational plan and talk about his vision for, and the school committee's vision for how they see this project being configured. And we're going to talk about the project in particular, just sort of give an update on what's been done to date and what are our upcoming next steps as we make some critical decisions. There's some really critical decisions. This is kind of the most important phase that we're entering right now, called PSR, otherwise known as the Preferred Schematic Report. Then we're going to talk about some very, very preliminary pricing, so we can talk about what the impacts of this decision would be on town's ability to take on debt. And then talk a little bit about how the MSBA's partnership will help offset some of those costs, and then discuss school opening scenarios and schedule. Obviously, schedule is a day-to-day thing that is constantly changing, but we have to kind of proceed as if we're moving forward until we feel a need to slow down, or the leadership here thinks that things are moving too fast, or we need more time to make a decision. So we'll talk through that. Next slide, please. The MSBA process. So it may look complicated. It is complicated, but basically that big red box is you are here. This is what we refer to as the PSR phase, where the gray areas in Module 1, Module 2, and Module 3 are how we've gotten here. These are the all process that we've followed to date. This is a prescriptive process that the MSBA requires in order for us to participate in their program. And so Module 1 is really all about the MSBA deciding which projects that are presented from all of the different municipalities deserve attention and eventually funding. Module 2 is about forming the team and hiring architects like Arrow Street, who is with us tonight, and our OPM left field project management. And then Module 3 is the beginning of feasibility study, where we go through and start to first identify all of the problems. And that's what we call the PDP phase, or the preliminary design program phase. What that does is that sets up all the questions. Those are all the questions that we answer in the PSR phase. And really it's about identifying what are the existing conditions, what are the challenges, what does the project need to solve in order to get us a successful project at the end. We submitted that preliminary design program on March 27th, just basically a little over a week ago, as we got through that. I won't go into a ton of detail on that. There's 1,700 pages for anybody who's looking for a little light reading while they're sitting at home quarantining. But there's a ton of useful information in there that we'll continue to add throughout this project. So that brings us to this phase where really what we need to start making some decisions and setting up a structure for getting to those decisions. The two major ones are grade configuration and ultimately enrollment, and site selection. So those are the two that will have the biggest impact on this project. Grade configurations, as approved by the MSBA, are either a 3 through 5 school with an enrollment of 845, or a 4 and 5 school, which is the same as Dale Street exists today, which I believe is 635. Numbers keep jumping around. I think that's the accurate enrollment. So those are the kind of the major decisions that we'll need to make as we proceed through Module 3 and the end of feasibility stage, and ultimately results in a submission for the preferred schematic report. That is basically, after evaluating many, many options, that is what we present to the MSBA as the town's preferred option, with all of the backup and all the history of how we get there. So that's our ultimate goal. And we'll walk through the schedule for that later. And then keep in mind, this is not a linear scale. So, there's no real time frame associated with how we get from you are here all the way through to an opening. And we'll walk through the schedule in more detail later. All right, next slide. Did you skip? So this is just sort of another graph, just sort of showing how feasibility study gets you all the way to a preferred solution. PDP phase we talked about, which included the existing conditions analysis of the existing school, physical condition, code analysis. How is it supporting the educational program? What's the capacity? How is the building functioning? On a separate track, educational program, this was done through a series of visioning sessions, both with the school administration, the school staff and faculty, as well as with the public through visioning sessions and community forums, which ultimately brought us to space summaries, and we have two, one for each grade configuration, which basically tell us how big the building should be for that specific enrollment. The third track in PDP is site selection, where we evaluated all the potential sites throughout the town, and we narrowed it down to 2 sites. We're not going to get into that in heavy detail tonight because it's a rabbit hole that we can get down, that we will get down, but the grade configuration decision is the first critical one. So that all feeds into a preliminary evaluation of a whole bunch of alternatives. And as those alternatives get submitted down, they start to be evaluated, and they begin to, the cream rises to the top eventually. And then we get to a point where we have a preferred solution. That preferred solution will need the support of the superintendent, the school committee, and the board of selectmen. Those three people are, and the board need to sign a letter basically saying that they support that decision. So that's why we're really here to try to help get everybody on the same page and be able everybody to hear sort of the same message all at once, so we don't end up with confusion. All right, next slide, Larry. So before I pass this along, I'm going to pass this along to Dr. Marsden. Before I do that, I'm going to check in with Gus Murby first and see if you or your board has any questions at this point.
Pete or Mike, any questions or comments?
No questions here.
Not for me.
Okay, and I don't think I have any yet either, Mike.
Thank you. Anna Mae O'Sheabrook, opening it up to you and the school committee.
Jess, Leo, Megan, or Tim, do you have any questions at this time? No, I think we're going to wait.
I don't.
Thank you.
All right, great. So Mike Pastore and the warrant committee.
For public sake, I just asked if I was on mute again while I was on mute. Anyone from the warrant committee? Hands up. Any questions? Seems like we're good, Mike.
Great, thank you. All right, so at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Marsden, who's going to talk about the educational plan and the vision for the project.
I think we can't hear Dr. Marsden.
Jeff, you might be muted.
Looks like we've lost some audio on this. Is everybody having the same problem?
I'm having the same problem, yes.
Yep, me
Okay.
too.
No, I don't hear Jeff.
Still connected, but I don't think Jeff's not talking.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Fine.
I just had the thumbnail of him and it didn't look like he was. Looked remarkably relaxed for someone who's been up presenting for 2 minutes.
Still no, Jeff.
I hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, there we are.
Perfect.
Thank you, Tim Baker. He said it could be your headphones, and that's just what it was. So I'm going to go off headphones then. That's just what the issue was. So thank you, Tim, for that. I just wanted to, I'll start over again. I want to thank everyone for their participation in this tonight. I know that everyone's busy, and to go through this presentation for something that's not only a huge project for our community, but for our kids too. So I want to thank everyone for that. As Mike had mentioned prior, we did a series of workshops that began in December and ended in February. 2 of those 5 were community visioning, where we had folks come in from the public that wanted to get a sense of what the status of the project was. The 3 others in the middle were educational visioning workshops from the educational working group, which we established That was made up of teachers, staff, school committee members. Gus was on that. Mike Pastore was on that. Lots of parents. So it was really a great group of folks that looked at the visioning of what could be in terms of a new school. So that was all led by David Stephen, who was a facilitator from New Vista Design, did a wonderful job. And we were able to get a lot of information to develop our ed plan based on what came out of those 5 workshops. So that was great. In addition to those workshops, we also had individual meetings and visioning sessions that Arrow Street did with our staff and teachers and principals and leadership teams. So that went very well as well. So we had a lot of feedback to develop this education plan. And as you'll see that we go through this, there's a lot of great feedback that came through that process. Next slide. So some of the highlights that we want to talk about in terms of the grades 3 through 5, which is the preferred model that we'd like to see. And we feel like that's an important thing for a few reasons. Pedagogically, in terms of instruction and learning, we feel that it allows students and families to be part of the school community for 3 years instead of 2. When you look at elementary schools and structures of school districts all over the state, you don't often see one like ours where kids are transitioning every 2 years. Most of the time it's a K to 4, K to 5, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. And there's a nice community built within those schools over a longer period of time. That isn't the case here. We're much like Hopkinton, Holliston, and Medfield, the only 3 that really do it that way. And it's been like that since the 80s, and it works, but we think that a 3 through 5 would be a much better model for us. Many of the curriculum frameworks that we use in terms of our instruction and learning are already configured grades 3 through 5. We feel like there's a better opportunity for vertical planning activities, all the articulation of those important things, student placement, if we have more grades per school. So we think that would be a really important piece as well. We'll have greater flexibility with scheduling, especially around specialists. Right now we have specialists that travel from building to building. Some of our specialists work in 4 or 5 schools. This will allow specialists to have a home base in a larger school and work with kids and be part of that community. There's definitely more opportunity for us in the development of specialized programs within special education. Right now, it isn't cost effective to develop some programs when it's only 2 grades, but if you have an additional group of kids in there, additional grade, it makes it much more cost effective. One of the things that you see in larger elementary schools is that the older kids act as mentors to the younger students. And sometimes we'll do that with kids at Dale Street walking over Memorial, but when you have them right in your school, it creates great opportunities for our kids to be mentors. And then the other piece is, and there's not a lot published on it yet, but it's been presented at national conferences, that there is emerging research around the longer a student stays in a certain school, it promotes better student achievement. So those are some of the ways instructionally that we think it's better to have a grades 3, 4, 5. In terms of why a 3, 4, 5 is advantageous to the project, I think the big thing that we've talked about is that it allows the district to support the projected growth in population, our student population. When we originally did our SOI a couple of years ago, we had a 3, 4, 5 for 600 students. And when we went to our meeting to MSBA, they said that was much too low. And typically an MSBA meeting, they'll want you to bring your numbers down. They wanted us to bring our numbers up. So clearly the projected growth that both MSBA and NESDEC have for us right now is that, for instance, NESDEC has us growing 21% over the next 10 years for our student population after declining 14% over the last 10 years. So certainly they've looked at the data, they do all this work, and they feel like we have a larger student population coming in. It establishes an early childhood center for us at the Memorial, which will allow us to really expand and improve our programs for both full day kindergarten and preschool. If you remember a couple of years ago, we had to have a lottery for full day kindergarten because we didn't have enough space to house it and we had too many people that wanted it. That isn't the case so far this year, but it could be certainly in the future with the numbers that we're seeing. We have a waiting list for preschool, and we have 4 teachers sharing 2 classrooms right now in our preschool, which isn't great. We want to be able to expand that program and offer different options for people and really get our 3 and 4-year-olds in our district as soon as we can. That's an important piece for us. it definitely creates a different, another opportunity for a whole group of kids to experience a new state-of-the-art building, which we think is important, not just limited to those 2 grades. And then, we received survey data for both community members and for teachers, and that shows strong support for grades 3 through 5. And I'll go through some of that on another slide. Clearly, there's some challenges with the 3, 4, 5 compared to the 4, 5. Increased square footage is going to increase the cost of the project. We know that. It does impact the grade configurations of our other elementary schools. So there is a slide coming up that shows the impact of that. And, whether it's a 4, 5 or 3, 4, 5 going forward, with these increased numbers of students, we're going to have to hire more staff, more classroom teachers. There's no way around that. So certainly a challenge of the project as a whole, but definitely one as a 3, 4, 5. Next slide. So here's some survey results from the parent and the community thought exchange. So we use the software program Thought Exchange, which is essentially a crowdsourcing software, which allows people to put a thought up online and then other people rank it and give it star ratings. So on the left, you'll see the one that has supports 3 through 5, the bar graph. That bar graph represents the amount of thoughts that people put up as part of this. So on this particular thought exchange, we had 412 participants, 349 thoughts, and over 10,000 ratings. So with an average of 25 ratings per person. So if you were someone that put a thought on here and then you went through and did some ratings, the average was 25 per person. So you'll see in the top red bar, supports grades 3 through 5 grade configuration. There were the most thoughts about that particular one. Student transitions was certainly important to people. Parents with multiple children and transportation, that came up a lot. If for some reason it's built at the Wheelock School, then that would really make it easier for parents, and that came up a lot through the survey as well. No doubt cost and taxes was an issue that came up. Folks who were concerned about the taxes they have now and what's going to be the impact as they go forward with a new school on top of that. That was definitely something. On the right-hand side, you'll see the horizontal bar graph, and that's based on star scores. So folks could put the number of stars that they think in terms of importance. So on the left, you'll see a 3-star scale, and it goes all the way to the right for a 4-star scale. It's actually 3.9 was the highest that they had. So the darkest the horizontal bar, the more stars or the highest ratings it got. So if you're thinking about a Yelp rating, so to speak, those dark are the highest ones. So population and space were the highest concerns that folks had in the community and parents. And then program MAP. So MAP is our program that Medfield After School program. And that was a big concern for parents. That was rated really high. They want to make sure that MAP is a part of this project because they feel it's important to have that option for them. So class size supports grades 3 through 5 configuration, and then parents with multiple children, again, those were the top 5 in terms of their star scores. You'll see at the bottom, you'll see the lighter scores. The one that received the least amount of star scores was keep grades 4 or 5. Next slide, please. So the next slide was one that we did with elementary teachers only. So this was 114 participants, 113 thoughts, 2,667 ratings. So you'll see on the left-hand side, grade level, grades 3 through 5 best, kindergarten, preschool, and building were the biggest issues that came out of that. I think there was a lot of support with making a kindergarten preschool at Memorial. There's definitely some concerns there that people said we've always had the 3 grades there. That could be an issue taking a grade out. 3 through 5 best was really something that came through as well. If you look at on the right-hand side, we have the star scores. So again, the darkest scores, the higher the stars. So building space, classroom space, shared staff, travel time, grades 3, 5 best, 1 extra before transition. Those were the top 6 that got the most stars in terms of ratings from the teachers. And then you'll see 3rd graders concerned at the bottom. So there were definitely some folks that put some thoughts in about concerned about 3rd grade moving over to a 3, 4, 5 building. But again, did not get the number of stars. So the greatest part about this whole software is that sometimes people just throw things out and then no one really believes it or no one even supports it. And then that gets weighted the same as something that someone really supports. This kind of teases that all out so that if someone has an idea that other people may not agree with or think is important, they get a lower star rating. So that teases that out and what rises to the top of the things that are most important to people. Next slide. So if you look at the grade configurations in what the current grade configuration does, the 4-5 and the 3-4-5, it shows you what happens to each building. So the current configuration you see in the far left, pre-K, kindergarten, 1 and Memorial, 2 and 3 at Wheelock, and 4-5 at the current Dale Street School. With the 4-5 configuration, nothing changes in terms of Memorial and Wheelock. Those configurations stay the same. However, if we go to a 3-4-5 configuration, Memorial becomes a pre-KK, Wheelock turns into a 1-2, and then if we do a 3-4-5, you have 3-4-5 in the proposed project of Dale Street. Next slide. So in terms of space summary, this gives you a sense of what the difference is in terms of the two buildings. The net square feet of a 3-4-5 is 87,000 square feet, and the net square feet of a 4-5 is 65. The gross square feet of 131 and the gross square feet is 98. So clearly a larger building with a 3-4-5. And you'll see that other than the number of classrooms, that's where the additional size comes in. So a 3-4-5, you essentially get 13 more classrooms at 39. You get an additional STE room, which is a science, technology, engineering room, which we sometimes call maker spaces in our classrooms right now. The special education program certainly extended. We're going to be expanding that program to serve our existing population. But we have an additional art room in the grade 3-4-5. And you'll see that in both projects. You'll see a general music and a full band room in both those projects and a 9,000 square foot gymnasium. So a lot of the data that came back from our visioning sessions is that one is we want to make sure that we can support the music program that starts in grades 4-5 in Medfield, and making sure they have adequate space to have their practices, their performances, etc. The lessons, which we don't have right now. Kids are in hallways, vestibules, closets, you name it, kids are practicing and performing. So we wanted to make sure that there was a general music room and a full band room. That was really important to us, which goes off to what MSBA, that's going to be a little bit more expensive because that's the full band room isn't really supported with MSBA guidelines. The 9,000 square foot gymnasium, again, is a little bit larger than what a typical elementary gymnasium would be. But a lot of the feedback that we got during the visioning sessions was that we want to have a community building that's open to the community, and certainly having the gym is a larger gym is important for that. We had a parent at one of those meetings say that, you know, my child plays basketball for a Medfield team, but we're driving to Wellesley, 3 times a week for basketball practice because we can't find any gym. So we thought that was important to keep that larger gym in there, not only for our use as a school, but also as community use after hours. Media center, cafeteria, kitchen, all pretty standard. We do have a larger stage to support the music program in both of our both the 3-4-5 and the 4-5. And because we have such a large enrollment in our music, we need to have a larger stage that would fit as many kids as we can on there. So that what you'll hear is the term cafetorium. So a cafetorium is what they build now in elementary school. So it serves as a cafeteria and a full-fledged auditorium with a stage and lights and soundproofing and all that. So that's what you see there. And then the administration, custodial support is all the same. The last bullet point is a staff daycare. So that's something that we felt strongly about putting in there. I'm not sure everyone feels strongly about that, but certainly a benefit that we now have for our teachers that we house out of the high school right now. And we would like to incorporate that somehow into the day program in the new elementary school. And that also could possibly double as a room for MAP going forward after school or before school. So those are, some of the additional things that we thought were important to put in the school as well. Next slide. This gives you a sense of what reconfiguration impact would be on Memorial School. If you look on the left, that's the school as you see it today, with the kindergarten classrooms on the top, and then the middle and the lower part are mixture of kindergarten classroom and first grade classrooms. If we were to make this a early childhood center as a pre-KK, you'll see the change. We have the full K classrooms up at the top. We're able to have 10 full day classrooms, which we can't do now. A half day program. We still have the special education space that that we need in larger rooms. We have them in really smaller rooms now, so that would be a great benefit for that program as well. We'd like to have a transitional pre-KK or a K1 transitional, depending on what that is. And you know, I had that in my former district, and I know other districts have it as well, where if you have students that just aren't developmentally ready to go to that next level, they can spend a year in a transitional pre-KK program, or depending on what the needs are, it could be a K1 program. And it gives kids a gift of time, and they're still part of our school community. So that's something that we'd like to add. If you look at the bottom, you'll see the pre-K classrooms. Again, 6 full pre-K classrooms, which would be able to offer many different programs that we can't do now. And we certainly have that waiting list, and we only have 2 classrooms with 4 teachers sharing those. So that gives you a good sense of what it would look like. Many of the spaces stay the same, but the classrooms themselves become K and pre-K. And certainly, if the enrollment happens the way both NASDAQ and MSBA are predicting, there would be no issue filling up this school with these programs at all, none whatsoever. Next slide, please. This gives you a sense of what Wheelock would look like as a 1-2. On your left, you see the current Wheelock School and how it's configured in terms of grades. On the right, you'll see what it would look like. We'd essentially have grade 1 on the first floor and grade 2 on the second floor. And it would give us additional space that we need for special education in our ELL population. We'd lose 1 reading room, but that's okay because we'd replace that with a classroom. But essentially not an issue to fit all of 1 and 2 in that building. There's a lot of classroom space there, and that would support any growth that we have in the next 10 years. Next slide. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm going to start off realizing I didn't include my own committee. If my own committee has seen a lot of this, but I'm going to open up to them for questions first. If there are any.
No, Mike, I'm good.
I'm good, Mike.
Okay. All right.
All set, Mike. Thanks.
Okay. So then Gus, Board of Selectmen.
Peter, Mike, any questions?
I had one related to the daycare. I'm wondering if it makes sense to have one location for the daycare in the whole town instead of spreading it around at the different schools. So that I would think there would be some advantages to doing that. I'm not even sure it's important to have it on site, but.
Yeah, that's a good point, Pete. I think one of the things is that we're growing out of our current space that we have at the high school. So we would be able to, what we're looking at a new school would be a much larger space to allow more kids to participate and more staff to participate. I think that it's really, we've actually moved what's at the high school out, and I should have been clear about that, move from what's at the high school out and put that in the new building because we actually took a classroom away from the high school in order to start that program.
Are we doing it on site because it's seen as an important benefit to the teachers, or I mean, the rest of the population just does daycare at the commercial facilities around town?
No, we do that for the teachers because we have definitely a population swell among teachers in terms of having children, and in order to get them back as quickly as we can, we want to retain our good teachers and our good staff. That's a great benefit for them. So they come in. We actually, we use Beginning Years, which is a Medfield business. They rent the space from us, and then we allow that staff only. And then if there are any openings, then it's open to the town of Medfield employees as well. But we start with just school staff, and we do that to Beginning Years. It's been a great partnership over the last 3 years.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions, Mike?
No, I don't have any questions. You can go ahead, Gus.
Okay. Jeff, I did have a couple of questions. Back on the where you had the education plan, the highlights, there were 3 challenges going with the new grades 3 to 5. The third bullet was student enrollment will necessitate more staffing. And I was trying to understand, is that increase in staffing a function of what this school will be, or is the comment there that, well, if our projected enrollment grows, basically I'm asking, is the staffing going to grow no matter what because the enrollment grows, or is something about this school going to cause an increase in staffing above and beyond what otherwise would be the case?
It's enrollment, Gus. I just want to make the point that no matter what we go with, if we're going from 26 to 39 classrooms, you need to have teachers in those classrooms. So it really it's a function of the enrollment, not so much the building.
Well, so the design of this, if we go from here's what I'm trying to reconcile. The building, if I am following the discussion right, is being designed to be appropriate to meet the projected increase in enrollment that we anticipate will come in somewhere, within the next decade, let's say.
Right.
If we build the building, we wouldn't just automatically hire teachers for the numbers of rooms. The question is, if we're building a building that's designed to meet the increased enrollment 10 years down the road, how are we going to use the building in the near term once it's up?
So we're
I'm
not
really coming from a staffing standpoint.
Right, so we're not building the building and filling it with, based on teachers. It would be based on the enrollment. So if we have school committee policy around what class size should be, yep. and that was something that came out a lot in terms of the thought exchange, class size, and people actually explicitly put, I don't care what grade levels you have in there, as long as class size stays low, that's all I care about. So that's an important piece. So in order to get class size where the school committee policy and the community expects, you're going to have to hire more teachers if this enrollment, if we have an increased enrollment.
But if you had 39 classrooms and that was designed to accommodate the increased enrollment you're expecting in 10 years, and it was designed to meet a certain target class size, before you're at that enrollment, what do? Staff, do you have 39 classrooms in use? It's just that the class size is well below what the target is?
Are you saying, are you going to try to fill up 39 classrooms? Is that what you're saying, regardless?
What I was really trying to do is get a handle on the timing of the staffing increase there, I guess.
Yeah.
What I'm saying, is it a function that we have a building with 39 rooms, so we need 39 teachers? Or is it that we are going to need 39 rooms 10 years from now, and when we get there, we'll need 39 teachers?
Yeah, based on the projections that we've seen, it looks like right when it opens in the next couple of years after it, definitely will need to increase in staffing at that point. If the projections MSBA are correct, that's what it looks like.
Right.
I think the question he's asking is if we happen to have only 37 classrooms worth of children of the recommended class size, are we still hiring 2 more teachers and spreading it thinner? And I would say the answer is probably no.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's what you were asking, Gus. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, definitely not.
And I had the question I had, and I don't know whether you have it. There's, in my head, I'm looking at the idea that there is a core set of requirements that are driving the need for the school. And then there are other advantages that might come with the school, but they're not actually the drivers. I'll give you one that even in the visioning session caught my attention, was when people were saying, well, gee, and I'm not arguing against the benefit, I'm arguing that some benefits are kind of, they just happen to come along with the facility. They're not the drivers of the design. So that's where I'm coming from. The one that jumped out at me was people saying it would be great if we had a school where people could have easy access to things like a gymnasium after hours. I agree, it is great. But I wouldn't necessarily design a school to provide that, because the school's not in the business of renting a facility. I would do it if we were having some collaborative thing with Parks and Rec or something like that, but we're not designing the school so that after hours, other groups can come and rent the facility. Certainly we'll do that, and we have always done it, but I don't see that as being a design driver.
So Gus, a couple of comments on that. I would say that revenue generation is always a big part of what we do. And I think that at this point in time, when you have the opportunity to build something that would generate additional revenue for a school department, it would be silly not to do it. The second piece is we do have collaboration with Park and Rec right now. They use the Dale Street School all summer. So they use the Dale Street School as part of their summer camp, and they use the inside when it rains and the outside ground. So, that could be something that gets expanded once we have a new school over at the other building. So we've worked really well with Park and Rec. We do have that collaboration with them now.
Okay,
But I would also add, Gus, the primary driver, this is Tim Bonfa. The primary driver of that is building design layout. Larry can talk more about it, but it's about security of the school and sort of how you break off the public and sort of school areas.
Yeah.
Much more so than around,
Yeah, I wasn't going after that one specific thing. What I was getting at is that in my head, as I listened to this, I'm trying to keep clear the core requirements that we're trying to meet with the school, with building a school, and separate those out from what I would call the supplemental benefits that might come with the school, but probably shouldn't be primary drivers for the design. That's all. And I'm just trying to straighten it out in my head. That's all.
Can I ask how big a 9,000 square foot gym is? Is that a single basketball court, or is that two full-size basketball courts?
That's one full size in the middle and two going back and forth.
So
It's like the Medfield High School gym then.
So I do want to add that I don't want to get hung up on the gym, because that's sort of a detail that'll get sorted out pretty easily. Generally speaking, when you get up to an enrollment that's approaching 900, the MSBA sees the benefits of the larger gym just from an educational perspective, let alone, let alone any rental fees that may be seen from that. If the smaller grade configuration is chosen, then we would need to make a decision, because it's unlikely that the MSBA would participate. Thus, we would decide whether it was worthwhile to the community to spend some extra money for it or not. But ultimately, I do want to get back to trying to focus on the grade configuration as opposed to the specific spaces right now, because ultimately that's sort of the next step. And really we need to sort of decide, how we're going to configure this school from sort of the high level in terms of which grades and which enrollments we pursue.
Yeah. So Mike, just to respond to that, part of where I'm coming from is that level discussion, because I'm sitting there saying, well, we started saying that we needed a school to replace 2 grades, and we are in a discussion around grade configuration for 3 grades, and that 3 grades, it's not across the board, but to a certain degree, that 3 grades is introducing a 50% increase in the size of the school, the size of the project, and the cost. And I'm trying to get my arms wrapped around whether that increase is driven off primary needs. And I'm trying to be open-minded about the opportunistic benefits even, or whether it's being driven by supplemental needs. This will be a more important conversation, obviously, when we get to what the real size of the project is. But
so ultimately, the MSBA is not going to allow us to proceed with the larger project based off of revenue generation from renting out the gym. They've allowed us to pursue it, and they're not ones to foster overbuilding. They allowed us to do that because they had examined sort of the system wide and looked at our enrollment, looked at how we're starved for space right now, and said, all right, we'll allow you to look at these 2 configurations. It's not that, we went in and said, hey, we'd like to build a larger gym, and why don't we add another grade? And so those types of things have gone through a lot of details. So they have to give us the permission to even explore that option. Those types of individual space discussions aren't what's driving the grade configuration discussion.
Okay. Well, thanks. That's a good start.
You're welcome. Any other questions from the Board of Selectmen?
I don't think so.
I have, Mike, well, you want comments later or just questions now?
If it's relevant to this discussion, then bring it up now.
I think it is relevant, and this is addressed partially to Gus, but to everyone else. I mean, I think we have to separate in this discussion what I would call the short-term considerations with respect to this building and the long-term considerations. I mean, ideally, this is a building that will serve the town of Medfield for 75 years. And we should not be looking at this building only in light of what the projected enrollment is for the next 5 years. I have questions about that analysis. I have no doubt that that's the best analysis we can do. But on as small a sample size as the town of Medfield, it is very difficult to project things like enrollment. It's hard to project it 3 years ahead. It's hard to project it 5 years ahead. It's very hard to project it 70 years ahead. And hopefully this building, if we do our job right, will still be serving kids in Medfield 70 years from now. And, Pete will probably still be on the Board of Selectmen at that point, but the rest of us will have moved on to something else. And so we shouldn't, we have to deal with the short term. We have to deal with what the enrollment is. We have to deal with what we might do to reconfigure a memorial. But to me, those are all shorter term issues. To your point, Gus, about whether are we going to try to fill all of these classrooms just because we have them, there will, of course, be pressure to do that, right? Because there is a strong, regardless of the evidence for or against it, there is a strong constituency around small class sizes. It's a universally held preference among people who have not studied the effect of small class sizes on education. But it is a strongly held preference, and you have to realize that is a strongly held preference. And so there's no doubt that if the enrollment projections are low 3 years from now, there'll be a suggestion, why don't we go down to 18 kids per classroom or 17? Because after all, we have the space. And I think it's the same discussion, the same issue or the same factor goes into talking about what we do with Memorial. To me, we should not be building a 3 to 5, 875 student school simply so we can expand our full day kindergarten, because parents might prefer to have more full day kindergarten slots, and parents might prefer to have more subsidized pre-K at a public school. Those are separate operational debates. Those are the kind of things that will change over time. I think we have to think about what are the potential needs for the district in the future. What are the things that could happen that we could reasonably anticipate? And I think one thing to keep in mind is if we go with a 4 and 5 school, we stay with that configuration, we are committing, unless there is a huge drop off in enrollment, we are committing to having 3 elementary schools. And we have to understand, in 5 school buildings, and we have to understand that the economics underlying the construction of our current arrangement of 5 school buildings are very different than the economics are right now. The amount that the towns had to pay at the time those buildings were built was lower. The construction standards were lower. The relative expense of those buildings was lower. So when we're thinking about, are we going to commit this town to having 3 elementary schools and 5 school buildings for the next 70 years, you are committing the town to having much more expensive buildings than we currently have. And so I think we have to think about this not only in terms of what's happening in the next 5 or 10 years. What does this do to our capital long term? What kind of flexibility does this give the town in the future to consider different options 15 years from now or 10 years from now, whenever Wheelock is time to go on? And the same is true with the gym, right? The gym is another thing where, yeah, maybe you obviously wouldn't build a school for a gym, but if you do have a better gym, does that let you have a smaller Parks and Rec project down the road? In other words, are you satisfying some of that demand and that need in the town this way instead of with another building? So while it's important to focus on these smaller issues, it's important to look at, however you survey the impressions of people who responded to that survey over the course of a week or however long it was out there. I mean, those are important considerations. Obviously, that's the constituency that's going to vote on this. But I think as elected and appointed people on the boards and committees we're on, we do have to keep that bigger picture in mind and understand what it means, not just for the town now, but in the future.
Yeah, just one brief response, and then Mike, you can keep pushing this ahead. I think Mike's hitting at the broader issue that's on my mind. As you said, Michael, one of the questions is what's the grade configuration? I'm sitting here saying, what's the criteria that I would use to even form an opinion? And so what was behind my questions there was actually me trying to think my way through what are the drivers. At first blush, you'd say, well, go with the cheaper project because you save more money. That would be just the pure financially driven decision. My question to Jeff around what these additional benefits of a third grade were, that's where that came from. And then Mike is introducing another dimension, which has to do with broader strategic, some strategic purpose of the town around where it wants to migrate its entire school infrastructure. And I don't have answers to it, but what I'm sharing now is that that's the kind of issue that I'm trying to answer for myself to be able to respond intelligently to the question, what do I think the grade configuration should be? So I'll shut up now.
Thanks. We have a lot more data to feed you, which hopefully will inform that decision. So next up, Anna Mae O'Shea, any questions from the school committee?
Jess, Leo, Megan, Tim, any comments, questions?
I guess I'll just make a comment and echoing the same concerns that Mr. Marcucci mentioned, and it's that forward thinking about 70 years from now. And the MSBA has echoed that in all of our conversations, is do not build this building for 5, 10, or even 20 years. This building will be here serving Medfield a minimum of 50 years. That's MSBA's goal. So if we were to take our student population 70 years ago here in Medfield, I have a feeling it's slightly smaller than where we were today. And so with that in mind and the rest of our aging infrastructure that we have, we do need to look forward thinking about what this building can satisfy with the reimbursement on the table. There is a truth in that labor costs and materials are not going to go down. So whenever we build, it will, in the future, it'll be more expensive than it was yesterday. So we do need to keep in mind that we are building for that 50 to 70 years. I like 70 years because that's the reality. We will not be tearing this building down after 50 years. As evidenced by some of our other buildings. And chances are we may be even adding to it. And we know how well the additions look in some of our buildings today. So I guess that is important to keep in mind. I know we're up against a very unprecedented situation in our world, but I still consider ourselves fortunate to be where we are, where we live in the United States. To be able to still consider such a project. And I think it should not skew us from making very informed, fiscally responsible decisions. So, and that's my only comment.
I suppose
just one more, if I could tag on with Leo. One of my greatest concerns is that we always have to be, as a committee, as our committee, we have to be student facing as well, and really giving the best opportunity we can for kids to learn and for teachers and staff to be able to serve them the best they can. So I have always thought about this project as something as very long-term and something that is, it is a tree that we will not all sit underneath, but that is essentially the spirit of our town, that we have to really think about the kids that come after, but we also have to think about what does happen when Wheelock is no longer serviceable, which is closer than we may think, honestly. I mean, it is 50 years old. So as we're thinking about it, it would be unfortunate if we decided that the short term was more important, that we had to give up the idea of thinking long term in these times where it seems so difficult to think about what's even going to happen tomorrow. You know, that's our purpose and our mission, is to think the longer term. So thank you.
Super. Just one comment I would like to make regarding one of Mike Marcucci's comments about, what are the drivers, short-term, long-term, and, is one of our goals really to provide the full day kindergarten to everyone if they want it. But I suppose it is not unimaginable in the future for the state to mandate full day kindergarten, I suppose. And I think that's a factor to throw into there as well if we are visioning long-term issues. Jeff, would you concur that that is not unimaginable? Full day.
Yeah, I think that's
mandates
within the next 5 years, I would think. I mean, at some point, right? They keep talking about it, but every time it comes up at the table, there's budget implications, so they retract from it. But it's definitely something, educationally at least, that we know is best practice for kids, and we think it's important for our kids in Medfield to have that opportunity.
Any other comments, questions from school committee members? All right, back to you, Mr. Quinlan.
All right, thank you, Anna May.
Thank you.
Next up, Mike Pastore, any questions from you or the warrant committee?
We do have a question from Joanna Hilbert.
This is Joanna Hilbert. This is just a question, not a comment. With regard to the memorial building, and it looks like you would be going from 2 pre-K classrooms to 4 pre-K classrooms, or I'm sorry, to 6 it looked like. Is the pre-K as well as the full day kindergarten, are those revenue driving services, and are they currently, and if so, is that an intention that that would continue or it be enhanced by this?
Thanks, Joanna. So both of those are revenue generating programs, both preschool, and we really can't take advantage of the preschool aspect of it because we only have 2 classrooms to use. So 6 would allow us to expand that and certainly expand our revenue generation there. And full day kindergarten, of course, is, unless it gets mandated, or as some communities have done, they've put it into the budget and just paid for it. As Mike Sullivan used to tell me, have those parents do an override if they want that. So I don't think that's something that is in our future for an override for full day kindergarten. So we would continue to charge that tuition and use that to pay our teachers and staff. But certainly we'd have much more opportunity with additional classrooms, Joanna.
So when you say to use it to pay your teachers and staff, is it self-supporting or does it actually generate additional income or revenue?
So it can't be self-supporting because a half-day kindergarten is mandated, so we can't pay the additional, the entire kindergarten staff with that. We only pay half their salaries with that on a full-day kindergarten. So we wouldn't be able to do that. Preschool, we have a little bit more flexibility with, certainly, but again, if it's mandated full-day kindergarten, all that goes away, and then the state puts that in the budget formula and we get money for it. Right now, when they calculate the Chapter 70 money for us as a school district, they count kindergarten as a half a kid because they don't count as a full-time FTE. So if they mandate it, there'll be a full kid that they put into the formula, and then we'll get state reimbursement from that. But as we know from our experiences in the budget, we don't get a lot of state money to begin with, so.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the warrant committee?
Good to go.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next stage. I think Larry, you were going to take over.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So greetings all, I'm Larry Spang from Arrow Street, and we're pleased to be working with the district, the town of Medfield, to work on your new Dale Street school. As Mike had mentioned, we're partway through what's called the feasibility study for the project. We submitted the PDP last week and are now rolling on to the preferred schematic report, or PSR. And sorry for all these acronyms, but it's part of the MSBA process. We wanted to very quickly show you the information that goes into the PDP. We certainly don't want to go through it in any detail because, as Mike had mentioned, there's some 1,200 pages and there's plenty of time to go through that. If anyone has a hard time getting a link, let us know, as well as if anyone has any specific questions, we're happy to address those. The report goes in, it is reviewed by the MSBA. They take about 2 to 3 weeks to do that. We then will go through and very carefully respond to any questions or comments they may have. But in the meantime, we're pushing forward with the next round of studies. And as Mike had mentioned, the PDP really sets up the problem to be studied. We're really identifying all the issues involved. And then we go through in the PSR and we essentially develop a preferred scheme. In this case, whether it's a 3 through 5 grade configuration or a 4 or 5 grade configuration, and which of the two sites, either the existing Dale Street site or the Wheelock site. And so just to go through briefly the table of contents, and I think this might address a bit the question that Gus started, was the educational program really is intended by the MSBA to drive the design of the building. And that Jeff and his staff put together a great program, about 30 or 40 pages. Our team, which includes an educational programmer, someone who is an architect, but also has a background as a teacher, has worked with both Jeff and the district, members of the faculty and the community to help guide that, but really it's what do you intend to accomplish? That gets rolled into what's called the initial space summary. That's a very formulaic template that the MSBA puts out that then describes all of the different spaces that we will need within the building, and it compares them to what they consider state standards for a school of that similar enrollment. And that gets you these various questions and sizes about size of classrooms, number of classrooms, et cetera. And we've prepared one for both grade level configurations, 3 through 5, 4 and 5, so that we can understand both considerations. The MSBA then requires us to evaluate the existing building and the existing sites. And some of you may have been present for our presentations on those. They want to understand from the district and the design team, what is the condition of the existing building, what's involved with keeping that as a longer term investment, or as in many cases, assuming that the building would be replaced with a new building. So they want a very rigorous process, which we did with ourselves and our engineers and have gone through and documented all of that. We have looked at both the existing Dale Street site and the existing Wheelock sites. Again, very rigorous process that the MSBA prescribes so that we can document all the issues that might be involved with each of those. In the end, we develop a set of requirements for the new site and buildings. And I'll flip a page here. And again, you can see these are a series of alternates that the MSBA requires. And just to be sure that I catch the main ones, they do require us to do what's called a code repair. If you were to keep your building, not improve any of the educational spaces, but fix all the issues related to code, it would cost a certain amount of dollars and require a certain amount of work. And they require us to go through that process. The second one they require is an add alter to the existing Dale Street School. Again, looking to say if you were to improve that existing facility and build more space to it, what would that be and what would that cost? And then in our case, looking at new building configurations, both for Dale Street and Wheelock sites, as well as the 2 grade level configurations. So you can see here, a lot of different alternatives were put together. Each of those was described in detail. And as you'll see in a minute, we began to put some preliminary cost estimating together on those. And finally, the appendix, which is there on the right side of the screen, this is all the information that gets compiled and submitted to the MSBA, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb to show exactly how the various sites fit within the town's planning, all the constraints on them, all the deeds, all these kind of things to help the MSBA review and essentially agree with this district's conclusions. And I think we were going to have Lynn do this one, but I can go ahead and do it if she's not on board, Mike.
I'm on board here.
Oh, hey, Lynn.
I thought you were doing this one, but I'm happy
Oh,
to.
okay. No, I'll go through it. So the major milestones for us to work through the decisions that we would be looking for in the next, let's say, month and a half, is the site selection, which of the 2 sites work best, and we will be preparing various studies to look at that. The grade configuration, and we understand all the issues related to that, essentially deciding what works. As I mentioned, new construction versus addition renovation, and then what we would do to decide on what's our preferred option, both site-wise and grade-wise. Other things we will be looking for is we will establish sustainability goals for the project. The MSBA gives a slight bump in the amount of reimbursement percentage-wise for higher sustainability goals, but the basic level is LEED silver is a requirement from them. In addition, you'll see there on the right side, major deliverables. These are all part of the site analysis, which I mentioned earlier. We look at the environmental situation, geotechnical, hazardous materials, in this case, mostly the existing building, traffic studies, cost estimates, et cetera, and all those come together in the preferred schematic report. Oops, sorry, jumped too fast.
So these next two slides show two schedules to get us to schematic design. This first slide shows us the current schedule that we're currently on, and it does represent a meeting that we had with MSBA back in December, which extended our previous schedule by a couple of months to allow enough time frame between the PSR and the schematic design. But the key dates on this schedule is we did make the PDP submission. We made that on March 27th. But the next scheduled submission to MSBA is the preferred schematic report. And we have that scheduled for July 8th. That will allow enough review with MSBA to get us to the August 26th MSBA board meeting, at which point they'll decide whether or not we're approved to proceed into schematic design. That would allow us the time frame required from PSR to schematic design, submitting it at the beginning of January for a mid-February 2021 MSBA Board of Directors approval. However, and this would coincide with voting, hopefully with the annual town meeting. However, it is at the very end of the 120-day period that MSBA requires that the town vote and sign a project funding agreement. The next slide, just given the current circumstances that we're in and realizing that in order to make the schedule on the previous page, we need to make some decisions such as site selection and grade configuration by the end of April, if not early May, in order to complete the preferred schematic report and get it in by July 8th. Realizing that, like I said, the circumstances that we're in, we took a look at extending the schedule to kind of look at how this might impact the project. Moving out to the next board meeting for preferred schematic would put us submitting the preferred schematic report to MSBA on September 9th, which puts us before the MSBA Board of Directors for approval on October 28th. This then would require that we submit the schematic design mid-February for an mid-April MSBA board approval. And this sort of aligns a little better with the annual town meeting in that soon after MSBA board approval, you'd be entering in your town meeting timeframe. But this does extend the project by a couple of months, and it has other implications that we can go over as we get to the last slide, but go ahead.
You want to stop there, Mike?
Yeah, before we move on, just a couple of comments on schedule for myself, and then I'll open it up. As Lynn stated, we're obviously in uncharted territory here. We went into this project with a pretty aggressive schedule. which is what the current schedule still shows. And recognizing that we may not be able to get to certain milestones and decisions in the fashion that we had originally planned. I asked her to come up with the secondary schedule, which shows us submitting a little bit later, and it saves us a couple of months. But ultimately, we want to make sure when we're making these decisions that we have as much of a consensus as possible. We obviously would love to get full consensus, but these can be challenging decisions. So this meeting here is really a first step in sort of seeing how this process will play out, gathering the feedback that all of these committees need to make this decision and to make their opinions known, such that we can get everything out on the table, and then see where we differ and see where, you know, we need to have further conversation, what further data will get us to a decision that we all can get behind. So I just wanted to lay that out there. None of this is sort of set in stone. Obviously, delaying schedule always has impacts, not just related to schedule. It sometimes can have cost implications, but given the fact that, you know, we're facing historic times here, no one really knows what's going to happen next week, let alone months from now. That said, we have to move forward with the best knowledge that we have to date, which is sort of why we're here today. And then we'll talk more at the end about, you know, people's thoughts about how we move forward. So that's really my spiel on schedule. I'll open it up to the SBC to see if there's any comments from the SBC.
I'm all set. Thanks.
No comments from me, Mike.
I'm all set, Mike.
Okay, great. Now, Board of Selectmen, Gus, comments?
Peter, Mike?
I'd be curious to know, planning backwards from the opening date of the school. Obviously, we want the school to be open in September. Do we know how long it's going to take to construct? I assume you guys do. So, are we?
Yeah. So we'll walk you through that. We're going to go into a little more schedule later on the different scenarios on school opening. It doesn't necessarily have to open in September. There are plenty of districts that do open their schools, you know, mid-year. But we'll talk about that in further detail later, Pete.
Okay.
Comments, Mike?
None from me.
So I have a few, and I'll again I'm going to try not to drag this out, Mike. So I'll put some points on the table. This schedule here is the schedule that the MSBA is kind of laid out as we can best go about implementing it.
No,
What?
no. So we've if you go back, Larry, to the current schedule. The MSBA does not set our schedule for us.
But the process, this is an MSBA defined process for which.
That's correct.
So my question, my fundamental question is, at what point in this process, other than the town meeting at the tail end of the process, does the town get to consider the cost of the project and the affordability of that from the town standpoint and feed that in? Because as I'm looking at this, the first time that decision is presented to the public is at a town meeting at the tail end when all the plans and all the design are done.
No, so we are, and we're going to present in a couple of future slides here, the very preliminary, we're definitely the purely conceptual stage pricing that we put together. So that'll be presented to the public, and we'll talk about presenting that in a public forum to get feedback on that as we've priced up all the options. There will be, once we start to narrow down some of these options, which is kind of the key to making some of these decisions, by choosing a grade configuration, we cut all the options in half. By choosing a site selection, we also cut all the options in half. So as we start to nail down these decisions, the options narrow down, and then we dig a little more into detail on each of the lesser options to develop more detailed cost estimating that all will go through the community and a community forum as well. This is just the first step, which is presenting it to you. We'll talk a little bit more about costs on future slides and how that'll impact it. But this will be presented, costs will be presented to the town for feedback multiple times between now and any vote.
Is there a point in this process where you're taking a fork in the road around the design, though, that it's almost turning the town's vote into a thumbs up, thumbs down vote on a specific project? Like I'm looking, thinking, gosh, it seems to me that maybe the preferred schematic report, or definitely the development of the schematic design, has us going down a path which would say we would need to know that the public is on board with the affordability of the project almost before we start that, which would put us into like August, that we'd need to have gone through this whole vetting process with the public.
No, the numbers will be presented well before August.
Okay.
And obviously they're going to be, the numbers will all be part of the whittling down process that we go through in terms of as we start to present the options. And I think you'll see some, before we get too deep into costs, let's get through some of the future slides because we're jumping ahead to some future discussion.
So let me make just one point, because you talked about needing the support of all the committees, and I'm not arguing it or trying to block here. I'm trying to make a point that where my head is at, my kids just finished their school. My youngest finished the school system 4 years ago, so I'm not that far out of having been a parent with a kid in the school system. And my kids got a heck of a lot out of the Medfield school system. One of the points, though, is what they got out of the Medfield schools was not just what the schools were and the teachers, it was actually what Medfield was and how the schools interacted with the community. And that piece of it does tie into what the townspeople can afford. And I don't think this process is first and foremost designed to answer that question. That's on my mind throughout this whole process, is are we going down a path that allows Medfield to still be Medfield at the same time that we're keeping the same high quality of schools? So I just want to make the point, not to argue the point, but in terms of, so you understand where my head's at.
I share that sentiment, Gus. I think, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people here that agree that the intent here is not to, build something that is above and beyond anything this town can afford. We're trying to be thoughtful about this process, and we will continue to provide more information. We're literally just getting started with this. I can tell you that we will be as clear and as transparent as possible about these costs. The MSBA does not want, they don't like no votes. They want to make sure that the towns, as they present their preferred options, they want to make sure that the town supports it, because getting a no vote kind of throws everybody back to the beginning. So we're either going to get behind it as a town or not. The only way, in my eyes, based on my past experience chairing the building committee, the only way we get to yes votes is by having the support of the town leadership, including the folks gathered here tonight. So,
thanks, Mike.
Okay. Mike, I'd like to add too that we won't be submission yay, and there is some sort of a consensus on even before we make the submission on the preferred schematic report. We have to have the representatives of the town and the school district, as well as the school building committee, sign the approval to submit. So we'll have these discussions prior to submitting any report.
Yeah, and if we don't have it, we don't submit. It may draw out the schedule. We may have to have some harder conversations, but we're certainly not going to have the opportunity to submit something that there isn't a support for within the community and within the leadership here. All right, so looks like Gus and the Board of Selectmen are done, so I will ask Anna Mae to see if the school committee has any comments at this time.
Jess, Leo, Megan, Tim, any questions, comments?
I'm good.
Anyone else?
Not hearing any anim. Do you have any anime?
I suppose my question would be to what else could we do, should we do to get, because I'm sensing just perhaps there's some hesitation in terms of getting greater consensus from the community beyond the thought exchange, beyond getting feedback from teachers. What else do we need to make our decision?
That's an excellent question. If you don't mind, we table that for the end. I've got some other data to get to that will certainly help inform, and then we can sort of figure out what this group needs to get to the next level of discussion.
Sure. Great, thank you. Back to you.
Mike Pastori.
Nothing from the warrant committee. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. Moving on, just what everybody wants to see.
Sure, right. And so we have developed some initial ideas based on the space summary template of the size of the buildings for the different configurations we've talked about. We have done a little bit of drawing to understand sort of how they fit on site. And then we passed along this information with some guidance to our cost estimator to then put together some preliminary pricing. And I do want to repeat Mike Quinlan's caution that this is very conceptual pricing and that prices are varying dramatically as we're seeing in this economy, in this current situation. These were put together really before that was upon us, but nevertheless, we're not quite sure where the construction market is headed, those of you who are familiar with that world. In any event, so the caution here is to please use these numbers to compare to each other because we think they're pretty consistent with each other, but I wouldn't necessarily say that this is your final project costs. So what you're seeing here is the different sites, the Dale Street site and the Wheelock site. The scope I mentioned at Dale Street, we need to do a base repair, addition, renovation, and a new construction. New construction at Wheelock. We are not including additional work at the Wheelock School itself. This is a standalone project. The grade configurations, and by the way, can everybody see the mouse as I kind of move it around? Yes. Okay, great. And then the estimated construction cost, and that is essentially what we think it will take a contractor to bid and build the project. And as you can see, we're putting in ranges. Several of these configurations have multiple options. We've, for instance, looked at a couple of different ways of building new at the Dale Street site and a couple of different ways of building new at the Wheelock site. And for those who are really interested, they're all well documented in the report. But you can see there's a varying degree of range. Base repair, which really, again, doesn't solve any of the educational program improvements that the district is looking for, we think is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 22 million. And project costs, those are costs that the district, as the owner, so to speak, would have. They include, in addition to the construction cost, your soft costs to do the work, various other expenses that are associated with the project. And those are then added. So this is your total project cost. This does not include the MSBA reimbursement. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So, but this is the total project cost. And you can see the addition renovation is somewhere in these numbers in terms of construction costs, varying depending on whether it's a 4.5 or a 3.45. And then the new is going through. Again, whoop, sorry, let me go back. Hit the wrong button there. One of the things we developed was a look at this first bullet point, CMR premium, so construction manager at risk. There's two ways under the state's procurement requirements to build a school. One is to put it out the traditional design bid build. We do a set of drawings, we put it out on the street, somebody bids on it and they build it. The second way, which is a more recent change about 10 or 12 years ago, allows us to hire a contractor based on their experience and qualifications. That contractor, that CM, construction manager they're called, then bids out the actual subcontracts to do the work, whether it's the electrician, the plumber, concrete, steel, and so forth. And so you get competitive bid pricing at the subcontractor level, but your CM is hired based on qualifications. There is a premium there. There's reasons that we can go back and forth on as to what the advantage are, but we did identify at this stage in the project, there's about a $7.5 million premium, and that's assuming on the new construction. As you can see here, the next bullet point.
Larry, just wanted to pause on that. So
yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mike.
in terms of CMR or CM at risk, Chapter 149A versus Chapter 149 design bid build, that's another discussion that'll be happening and make a decision later. For the purposes of this discussion, we're carrying worst case scenario. So that's why the CMR premium is still carried in these numbers and may be taken out if we decide to proceed with a design bid build project. So we'll have more discussion on that. I do want to just acknowledge that we are carrying it just as a worst case scenario at this time, and we may be able to reduce numbers accordingly if we choose a different path.
Sure, thanks, Mike. The second bullet point gets to the question at hand, really, what is the difference between the 3 through 5 grade level configuration and the 4-5? It's approximately a $16 to $20 million swing, again, depending on the site and depending on the final configuration that we pick. And the third bullet point we were asked, and we put together some pricing, very initial at this point as well. This would be an add alternate or an add to the prices you're seeing in the table. If we were to approach a high energy efficiency, what's called a net zero, where you're trying to use as little energy, so you're saving as much as you can and trying to generate on site, there's really sort of a $2.2 to $2.9 million premium for that in the event that we tried to go in that direction.
Add on top of that, Larry. So a lot of MSBA projects are, especially elementary schools, are looking at this and evaluating this. And it really depends on the town's appetite for paying some upfront premium in order to get a more energy efficient building that is not only more sustainable, but also has lower operating costs. So not everything necessarily needs to be quote unquote net zero, which has a lot of other implications. We will be evaluating all sorts of different mechanical systems and HVAC, MEP, all sorts of different systems that operate the building. We'll be exploring all of them and looking at the most cost-effective way. We've always operated in Medfield as trying to make a long-term view on those, including in the public safety building. Given that we had a favorable bid environment, we were able to add a PV array, which has drastically reduced the electrical load on that building. So we'll talk more about that in the future, but I just want to note that that is not included in the price at this point.
Correct. Thanks, Mike. So I guess we should stop there. And
well, given rather than I think we can keep going through. Okay. I'd rather sort of get through a little bit more of the data and presentation, and then we'll open it back up. There's not a lot left, so I think we should just push through before I open it up for more questions.
Okay, this slide is basically showing that.
And you're getting a lot of feedback on your phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's just kind of echoing, sounds metallic of some sort.
I'm on the computer. I don't know if I can do anything about it, but I'll try to talk slowly. This is indicating
You're on a headset. It could be the plug.
I'm not on a headset, so I've been having technical difficulties all night. I apologize. But
I can do this quick.
yeah, I'll do it really quick. Sorry. I know it's probably annoying, but this indicates the base reimbursement rate that MSBA has provided for the town of Medfield, and that's the 39.84%. There is opportunities as we carry on to increase this reimbursement rate, and some of those are by our maintenance factors, as well as by 2 points for the sustainability measures that we put in place. So this could go up. However, I want to caution you that this is a percentage rate of eligible costs only. And some of the ineligible costs are any construction costs over $333 a square foot. Any site cost over 8%, any building permits that the town requires to be paid, MSBA doesn't reimburse for those because they see it as the town paying itself. Demo and abatement of the Dell Street School wouldn't be considered reimbursable if you decided to build on the Wheelock site instead of the Dell Street site. And any expenditures on furniture and fixtures or technology within the school that exceeds $2,400 per student. There are other ineligible costs, such as any spaces that are outside the MSBA guidelines. MSBA looks at those and makes a decision on whether or not they're reimbursable or not, and any soft costs that's anything beyond the hard construction costs. If they exceed 20% of the construction costs, they don't pay for that as well.
So Lynn, I'm going to take over. The feedback is just kind of, I think, really hard to understand. So this slide is really just to lay out that the MSBA sets a reimbursement rate for the town and based on a lot of factors. Ours is 39.84%. When all is said and done, when this project comes in, and let's say the project costs $50 million, we don't get 39.84% of that. There's certain things that are capped. There's certain things that are ineligible. So in essence, our effective reimbursement rate will be less than that. So there are ways, as noted here, there are ways to up that with incentives that the MSBA wants to encourage. So we will explore that. Obviously, we want to maximize our reimbursement. We want to make sure that the MSBA is participating as much as possible, and that we're a true partner in it all, and that we're being responsible about not putting things into the project that we know we're not going to be reimbursed for unless they truly are adding value to the project, to the town, to the school, and it makes sense for the town to participate in, regardless of MSBA participation. So that's sort of the point of that, and then what you'll hear more about is eligible reimbursements versus ineligible. We'll move on to the next slide, Larry. So going back to cost for a second, what this begins to do, and I stress begins because this picture is still at the 10,000 foot level, and we're going to need to drill down as we start to eliminate options. We start to define what the project looks like. We get a clearer picture of how much it'll cost. So a lot of this has been input from the previous slide about the estimated construction costs, the estimated project costs, and then the maximum burn, which is sort of an unrealistic number because we will never get the full 39.84%. But it gives you at least an estimate of the likely town share of the project and what the different implications are for the different configurations, specifically, the grade configurations. We have multiple options for each, but what you can begin to see is that the town share is somewhere between an $11 and $15 million decision. ultimately in the size of the project. So, you know, it's not necessarily a linear scale of, you know, X number of kids and enrollment equals X dollars. So there's a little more to it than that. There's some things that are true, that are based for both projects, regardless of the size. So that kind of gives you a sense of the scale. But noted on the previous slide, really from a cost perspective, we're estimating, and we're trying to give a range right now, that going from a 4 to 5 configuration to a 3 to 5 configuration potentially adds $11 to $15 million to the project. Next slide, Larry. So school opening scenarios. So I think Lynn was going to do this, but I'm going to take over given her technical difficulties. So up at the top, you see what is our current schedule for feasibility study and schematic design through an estimated funding phase, which would begin in the spring of next year, late winter to spring, which would then lead to construction documents. As noted previously, the current schedule assumes early packages, which basically means we bring on a construction manager at risk, a Chapter 149A procurement, and then we start to release early packages before the design is complete. This method is good for accelerating schedules and is really the only way at this point we would get to a school opening in September 2023. To follow a traditional design bid build process, or Chapter 149, which is how we typically do our projects in Medfield, there wouldn't be enough time to get us to an opening in September of 2023. So looking at the alternatives, we look at the next option would be to open the school in January of 2024, a mid-year opening. And so this would allow for, excuse me, either a CM at risk approach or a design bid build approach. And quite honestly, given this type of project that I see design bid builds sort of lends itself to this project, because paying a premium for CM at risk is really the benefit you really see with that would be an accelerated schedule or a very logistically challenging project with a lot of phasing. And quite honestly, I don't see a lot of the projects, the options that we're evaluating, seeing the benefit of that. And I struggle to see how we're going to make the schedule of the school opening September 2023. That's just my opinion, and I'm sure everyone else will share theirs. But so we've factored in two alternatives. One would be to open in January 2024, and then a second one would be to open in the fall of 2024. And then what the team has done is they've estimated what the potential impact on cost would be from an escalation perspective. For those who aren't familiar, escalation means the cost of construction going up. The general trend has been about 4% a year or so over the last couple of years that we've seen in the business. And so we just put an estimate out there that the building, may cost 2 to 3% more. That said, as we've noted, there is a premium to CM at risk. So going to that second schedule, and a design bid build approach, it may be negligible. And who knows where the construction market will be when we actually bid the project. So a lot of that is just really cloudy right now, but hopefully we'll get a clearer picture once we come out of this COVID-19 craziness. So you can see really we're looking at these three options, and the first one restricts us in not only making sort of decisions very rapidly, but bringing on a CM that we would pay a premium for. The second one is probably the fastest, in my eyes, realistic option, but requires a mid-year opening, which may or may not be an issue. You could potentially, even with a 3, 4, 5 school, you could move over mid-year the 4th and 5th grade from Dale Street and then not move the 3rd graders until the fall. So there's plenty of towns that have taken this approach. It is feasible. It's certainly a little more complicated, but that's why we have a good team to help us through that. And then, the fallback option is that we look at September 2024 opening. Now, I will say, I know a lot of this discussion will all be centered around the borrowing and when we would take on these debt levels. We've been talking to Christine and Nick and trying to get some idea of where we stand from a debt perspective, as some of the debt that's on the books for the 3 school projects back in the late 90s starts to come off. It will help mitigate the additional debt we'll be adding. Just to be clear, we obviously are going to be adding more debt than will be coming off. This will be a net add to the town's debt level, but it will be mitigated. This isn't just all add at this point. There are some significant amounts of debt payments and service that will be coming off the books that will help to make it a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. But, those are sort of the 3 scenarios we're evaluating at this point. And next slide. So before we, so what are the next steps? So we can talk a little bit about, go back later. So really the first step here is trying to get, a support for a grade configuration recommendation. Obviously, we want to hear everybody's feedback, what their thoughts are. People or the different committees will certainly go back to their own, meetings and debate this. But really what we're looking for from you is guidance, how we get to a decision, how we can get everyone on board to a point where we're in agreement about what the grade configuration should be. And then ultimately the next step would be the next major decision is the site selection, which will take a little bit of a different process, but that will be the next step. And then, the question really the design team and the OPM team have for us tonight is, can we make some of these significant decisions by early May to allow for a July submission? I personally struggling a little bit with that, but I'll open that up for discussion as well. Next slide. All right. So I'm sure there's lots of questions now since we threw a lot more data at you. So I'll start with the school building committee and open it up for questions.
Mike, I don't have a question per se, but the whole projection of cost with this COVID-19 right now, as you've pointed out, is like extremely speculative. So, because we don't know whether this recession we come out of it quickly and roar back like some people think, or whether it's more prolonged. So I think it's just my opinion about this whole decision timeframe. It's going to be very difficult to get people focused on a decision in May. Well, aside from what all the things they're focusing on anyways, but to get that attention and have hanging over it sort of this cost uncertainty, because we'll know a lot more about this in September, about whether it's a more permanent situation or whether it's, going to release itself after some of this COVID-19 stuff passes. So, I mean, just my feeling is that it's going to be very difficult to make this decision, in May.
Tim, which decision is that? Is that on grade configuration or on site configuration?
Well, I would say on any decision that's based on, unless we start talking relative cost, but I think if people are making decisions based on actual cost, I think if we can talk relative, like one to the other, maybe we can get attention. I know on a lot of our projects, people are just saying it's just very hard to get the public to think about these things. And these kinds of forums, which are great, I mean, they're working better than I think anyone thought, but then they don't replace kind of in-person forums. And, when you add in, if people look at those numbers and think that those are, right now, I don't think those numbers, sometimes some committees are making decisions, should they even talk about costs at this stage, just because it's so speculative right now. I mean, if there's a prolonged recession, which I don't think anyone knows right now, you're talking about most likely pretty significant cost reduction, not escalation, if it plays out like it did in 2008 and 9. So, my feeling is that it's just it's just a big kind of a decision to, if we can wait, I think that we're going to be better, we're going to better serve the town in terms of, them feeling more comfortable about the decision making. But I mean, the other option would be to do it in relative terms and sort of frame it as kind of a, not the total project cost, but just in sort of relative terms. And, is there a benefit to the long range planning that I think Mike talked about pretty, well in the previous slides.
Any other comments or questions from the building committee?
Hey, Tim.
Mike, go ahead.
Tim, just a clarification. So are you seeing that in, like, say, the Westwood project or the Ashland project, which started right around our time? Are you seeing that they're kind of taking a little bit more time to look at these things based on the COVID-19 stuff?
So
You're muted for some reason. Tim, you're muted if you can hear me. I'm going to unmute you.
sorry, guys. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike can speak better about Ashland, Jeff, but in Westwood, we're moving forward. There's a fair amount of consensus around what to do in Westwood. There's been a lot of public interaction and there hasn't been much back and forth around it. I'm not sure we're at quite that spot where they are. I think, but they're not sure what they're going to, they're sort of going to take it, see what happens over the next couple of months. I mean, they're on the same timeline, but I think that, if they feel that it's, if they feel that the public isn't able to get engaged enough in it, I think they're not going to do something rash. They're going to move more deliberately.
Right. And they're closing a school as part of that too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Ashland's moving full speed ahead. They, as based off of sort of a similar recommendation, we held a public forum with their Board of Selectmen, their finance committee, and their school committee, which was very similar to this. They're deciding to proceed with a preferred option. They're in the process of pulling that all together. But there are other towns that have stopped projects completely. So I think it's up to what's right for Medfield, and I think that it's important that everybody here have an opportunity to chime in as the leaders of this town, what they feel is best for this town.
Yeah, I think this is Mike Marcucci. I think that, I agree with Tim, but I think the level of uncertainty right now is such that we don't even know enough to know that it's time to change the schedule. And I think when at our last Board of Selectmen meeting, we were talking about the townwide master plan and the upcoming town meeting and the rest of it. And I think our consensus was that it's going to be at least 30 days before we have a clearer picture of anything. And so I think we need to keep doing the work on our end to keep the process on track. But I think everybody recognizes that we don't know when we're going to get back to normal. We don't know what normal is going to be. We don't know I think as people look at what's likely to happen, there may be an interim period where things are not the way they were circa, I guess, pre-EEE. Things are not the way they were circa October 2019, but they're also not what they are now. And that's going to have uncertain economic impacts. That's going to have an uncertain impact on our ability as a town to deliberate and discuss these issues is going to have an effect on the municipal bond market. So I think we all just have to be realistic about the fact that we may have to adjust the schedule, but we should not contribute to any delays or requests for extension of time. And it may well be that 6 months from now, 9 months from now, things are very different and we've got to adjust. So I agree with the sentiment Tim has expressed. I think that's quite likely or possible that may happen. But we should get as much work done as we can while we can. But I don't think we're going to make this decision as a town over Zoom and, through an all mail-in override ballot of some kind following a virtual town meeting. And so I think we have to have some understanding of what's going to happen. And frankly, given the fact that this pandemic has resulted in massive school closings, we don't know if in some of the regulatory and other things that are going to come out of this experience that may impact the nature of the building itself, depending on what advice and recommendations are coming out of the federal government, the state government, as people think through what it means potentially for us to face this again in the future. There's obviously been a number of near misses over the last 20 years, at least from the United States perspective. And so the only certainty at this point is uncertainty. But we should not be counting on an extension. Let's put it that way. If everything does come roaring back and we're faced with making a decision, we should be prepared from a town side to make that decision.
Any other thoughts, comments from the building committee?
No, this is Mike Weber. I echo what Mike said at the end there. We just need to keep moving forward and figure it out if things change, as when we have the information available.
I agree with that too. I think we need to be able to stay as nimble as possible in the current situation. And obviously anything that is dire, we'll need to pivot our decisions. But to keep all the variables open, we have no idea what the MSBA will be presented with as a stimulus package, even to make sure that we have construction moving forward to keep people employed also. There's all kinds of options that could happen in the next, decisions that could be made in the next 12 months. So I think that we need to, be as nimble as possible, leverage the technology we have available to us, and, be able to not us be any kind of blocker, allowing us to maximize our opportunity as a town moving forward.
Can I ask a question, Mike? Say you don't stop or extend the process, but I also am hearing that we won't be able to make the decisions we need to make to allow a July 8th submission. So we will be asking MSBA for an extension of time for the PSR and the schematic design. They will definitely give it to us. There's no issue with that. I just wanted to be clear that we would be extending the overall schedule.
So in case anybody wasn't able to get all of that, here's what I got. But basically what Lynn is saying is that what she's hearing from the group, and I don't disagree, is that there doesn't appear to be a path to be able to make some of these significant decisions, including this one that we're talking about tonight, in a time frame that would allow us to submit in July. So we would be asking the MSBA to submit 2 months later in September and for the October meeting. That's something that I fully expect they won't have a problem with. They're still dealing with the implications of all of this throughout their whole system. So they have not yet fully absorbed it, just as we have not.
That's what I was saying, but I thought that you said that I was saying waiting until September, but I heard from Leo and Mike Weber more feeling like we could move forward in time for this July 8th submission.
So what I'd like to hear from the Board of Selectmen and the other committees before we sort of make any sort of broad decisions on that. But the gist that I got was that I personally I'm not seeing a ton of enthusiasm for making this major decision until there's some sort of return to normalcy. But if I've interpreted that wrong, by all means, correct me.
I have a question, Mike, and that is back to my original question from earlier. It seems like Westwood's going forward, Ashland's going forward. We had feedback as much as possible with thought exchange from the community, from teachers. I'm wondering what else could we have done to make a decision or come to a decision sooner rather than later so that we can make that July 8th deadline. I know that there are so many unknowns, but with what we know now, the information we have now, I suppose what could we have done different, or what I'm just trying to understand what else do we need, and how else can we achieve getting more feedback if that's what people need to hear.
Can
I
I take a crack at that, Mike?
Yes, actually, I was just going to say I'd love to hear from the selectmen on this one.
Anna Mae, this is my comments. First off, I'm going to be a voice for conservative burdening of taxpayers. I think it's important to have that voice, and I probably, Mike Pastore hasn't weighed in yet, but along with the Warrant Committee, I think there has to be that voice in the process, and I'm sure it'll get there. So I'm not actually, but my purpose in that voice is to try to reflect how people what the people in the town are prepared or not prepared to support. This is not me having an opinion, just using a position to push something. As I look at this particular situation, if we push the public for support at a time of significant uncertainty, I would expect the public to be more risk averse than might be the case at a time of less uncertainty. So if the thought was, well, we want to go with the most, financially conservative or the most conservative path anyway, and it's a safe path, and we want to make a case to the public that, hey, we might as well go ahead anyway because it's the safe path, the low risk, that would be one thing. But I actually think the argument that you're trying to make is that the public should support a more aggressive level of support than I suspect many people expect to see. So there's a convincing process here that I think is going to have to take place. My experience would be, if that's an aggressive convincing process, you're better off doing it during a period of less uncertainty than more. So it's not like you did anything wrong, except that you didn't discover a cure for the coronavirus, but just sizing up the whole environment, I think there's a risk in pulling the public together to support something at this time, to the extent that this is pushing them beyond something they would have expected to see.
I understand, I suppose, but I'm also trying to understand if we were not in coronavirus world, would we still be at the same point, not being able to make a decision?
Well, in fairness, I don't think the conversation around the grade configuration has to stop. The deadline is the issue, and that's because we're trying to make decisions at a time when it's unlikely the coronavirus situation will be cleared up.
If that didn't exist, we probably would be having this conversation and we'd be charging ahead, trying to make that July 8th thing.
Yeah, I think if we had had the opportunity to have a public hearing at which, whether it was this meeting, or it might have been this meeting, would have been effectively the public hearing where anybody who had a view on this, had a question about this, could come and be heard and have input into the process. I think you have to have that kind of event before you do any kind of thing like this. I mean, every building project that we've done in town, there has been, whether it's in the context of a Board of Selectmen meeting or a Warrant Committee meeting, there's been effectively a public hearing at which, well before there's a vote, people can come and weigh in and have input. And this process has moved along the MSBA process, but at least as I conceived of it, that public hearing was going to happen at this meeting or thereafter in the process,
Certainly,
because it
Mike,
hasn't happened yet.
Mike, if I could interrupt, it certainly was the plan was to kick off the discussion. But that was, again, this was just the first step. There's certainly a plan to hold a community forum on this topic and gather feedback. So the idea was, before we went to the public with all of this information, we wanted to vet it first with all of you as leaders of the town who are more engaged than many of the public, and wanted to get your feedback first, such that we could understand what further information might be needed. Those steps will still occur. We're certainly not, in my opinion, I don't think we're at a point where we're asking anybody to vote on something at this point. What we wanted to do was present to you the data, present to you how we've gotten here. And then we really look to you for feedback on what you and your committees need. What further information do you need? What feedback do you have for us, such that we can then start to structure further public engagement and get that information out there. Now, that was all before this COVID-19 issue, which is only further complicated things. So we're now at a point where we're trying to see what we can do to move the project forward while still understanding the uncertainty that's gripping the whole country right now. So, this is all unprecedented for us too. And ultimately, we're looking for your feedback and your input. I personally do not feel that sort of putting the pressure on to make July is the right option, given all this uncertainty. I always thought that original schedule was aggressive, and would feel more comfortable if we did target the September submission personally. Because, and the other thing is, I think that I don't like being constrained into having to choose the Chapter 149A project, which adds a premium that I don't think this town should need to bear for this type of project. So I guess my question would be back to Anna and Jeff, Anna Mae and Jeff, and say that, given all of this, what is the benefit to the town to really push this aggressively to get it open for September 2023 that would outweigh that kind of uncertainty, if there is any? I'm not trying to put a leading question out there, but I'm looking at the pros and cons of it, and I'm seeing a lot more cons to pushing this through. And I think there's some others that have the same reservations. So I guess I look to you guys to see, if there's something we're missing in terms of the real added value of getting to an earlier opening.
Jeff, do you want to answer or attempt to answer that? And then Mike, can I ask the rest of the school committee to chime in if they need to? Okay, great. Jeff?
Just so I understand, absent of COVID-19, this conversation would be taking place in terms of slowing things down, just so I understand that.
In my opinion, the original schedule was always aggressive. And as we've gone through the process, it's appeared to me that achieving it would place some restrictions and some added costs, in my opinion, onto this project. Personally, and I'm just speaking personally, all the members of the committee can chime in, but I personally don't see that as something that we should be pursuing. The COVID-19 thing just puts it over the top for me. So I don't think there's a huge negative impact personally to holding back on the PSR submission to give us a couple of more months to get some clarity around the COVID-19 situation, and hopefully some more public engagement on some of these major decisions. That's just my 2 cents. And
yeah, and I just want to, because Jeff, as far as like I started this conversation, if we didn't have this COVID-19, I'm not sure what I would feel about it, because we'd be having this as a public meeting and 60 or 70 people might have showed up. They would have seen numbers that I think would have been realistic and, supportable by what's happening. And so who knows, I don't know how that dynamic would be because it couldn't happen. So what I'm saying is, given what we have with COVID-19 is my reason why we should move it to September. From my perspective, because I don't know what we would have seen if this was a public meeting.
That's fair.
Any other school committee members? Jess, Leo, Megan, Tim?
It's Tim. I mean, maybe it's been answered, but what bad things happen if we do move it back to September? Or back 2 months on the PSR? I mean, it seems like it just from Mike, the way you described it, it probably makes the schedule option A, less likely. I'm more just, when we look at it, what bad things happen if we do? I'm hearing risk if we push it forward. What bad things?
If you had asked that question 2 months ago, my answer would have been, that the longer you wait to start construction, the more expensive it's going to be. That scenario still may be true or may not. We really don't know. So from a cost perspective, we're not sure. It could be potentially beneficial if we do hit a hard recession and costs are driven down by the time we get to bidding. It could be that we recover from this very quickly and we get right back to the heated construction market we were living in. That, again, no real clarity there. We probably won't have that for at least a month or two, and potentially more. From a schedule perspective, in my opinion, it would probably definitely push us to, at the earliest, a winter of 2024 opening, in January of 2024, as opposed to a September of 2023. And I don't necessarily know that that's bad. I personally, it's different. It certainly gives us a little bit more time to make decisions. It certainly gives us a little bit of time to look at when we start borrowing money and how that's impacted by other debt coming off the books. So, I personally don't see it being a major impact negatively, personally.
No, and I'm looking at your notes on that, the January opening. My notes were, you said, your high level said fastest potential scenario, right? It gives us some flexibility on there. So,
I think it's a realistic scenario, is
that an 18-month build schedule, Mike, or 24?
I believe it's 24. It depends. I mean, really, what this slide is showing is, a Chapter 149A CM at risk approach. But you could potentially, this schedule could change into a design bid build approach. And so those early bid packages would just go away and you would probably modify that a little bit. But I do believe that you could achieve this schedule with a standard Chapter 149 project, a design bid build approach for procurement. And that would also help to eliminate some premium on the procurement method. So there is a premium associated with CM at risk. And much as it's easier to manage the construction that way, you pay for that premium. And in my experience of that, I don't see the value of it for this type of project. And did you have something? Okay. Should jump back off. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, that helps. It helps.
Anyone else on the school committee would like to ask a question, make a comment?
Just want to thank everybody for persevering through this crazy time and doing their best to do what's right for Medfield. That's all. It's amazing to see us all convert to this digital format so quickly, and and try to continue this process of governance and everything else. So thank you.
All set, Anime?
Yep, thank you very much.
All right, Gus, you're up next.
Again, I'll defer first to Pete and Mike. This time Mike is a selectman, not as a member of the.
Nothing for me.
I had a couple thoughts, Gus. One is that I think that if we're talking about the issue of the relative cost between the proposals, that we can really go forward with our thinking about that. It's clear that the Dale Street School in its current configuration is at an end of life situation, and we need to do something. So we should be moving forward regardless of the uncertainty that we're in now. So I guess my goal would be to try to get that 11 to $15 million choice to the town somehow. And I've heard Mike, well, both Mikes, I guess, suggest a forum of some sort or a hearing of some sort. I would prefer to see it actually go to an annual town meeting somehow, if that's possible. I mean, on your chart here on the screen in front of us, well, not this chart, but it didn't get to the town meeting until a year from now. We're probably going to have a town meeting in the next several months somehow or other. And it might be good to get a reading from the town meeting at that point as to whether they have the stomach for the extra 11 to 15 million to get the differential between the 4-5 school versus the 3-4-5 school.
That would be first I've heard. If you, as the Board of Selectmen, feel that you want to put it on the warrant for this town meeting, that would certainly be something that we would have to sort out pretty quickly.
Well, it would get you a much broader reaction from the town than just holding a forum where 60, 70, 100 people even come out.
Yeah.
Pete,
that's not till June, right?
I think if it's June, I don't think we can do that, Pete, because I'm not sure that the public will be educated enough to make a good decision. On the other hand, if we don't know how the legislation has now authorized us to push out beyond the fiscal year. So to Pete's point, I would think if we were looking at a fall annual town meeting in September, which we've talked about in the Board of Selectmen's meeting, then all of a sudden that makes sense. If we do wind up going ahead with the June 15th meeting, I don't think the preparation time is there to get an intelligent answer, on a warrant like that. Aside from the fact that warrant's closed right now anyway, but it kind of depends on what the delay is. I understand what you're saying, Pete.
I'd also have to check with the MSBA. I've never heard of any towns doing something like that for this type of decision. They have their standard.
It'd be non-binding, but it would be a way of getting the feedback.
I still would need to bounce that off the MSBA. It's just not something, we've done a lot of MSBA projects. I can't recall there ever being a time when the town has put it to a town meeting vote for.
It would give the residents of the town an opportunity to weigh in before the process is really set in stone.
Yeah, but Pete,
it won't be, you're not going to get them to make an incremental decision on grade configuration if you haven't also sold them on the total cost of the school.
Well, I guess what I'd be looking for is the that incremental, the relative additional cost of doing the 3-4-5 school. I think that's the decision that they need to as a town, decide on.
And there are certainly a lot of opportunities, and hopefully more in person eventually, but to present the information and gather feedback either through public forums or through polls, through other type of information gathering.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't think this is the kind of decision that's really necessarily lends itself to a pure plebiscite. And my concern about putting it to an annual town meeting is that you'd have 10 minutes to discuss it. I mean, the reality is that even when you have relatively complicated issues at an annual town meeting, it's a relatively short discussion. And I think if we had a hearing where people who were concerned about this could talk about this, could have their views considered by the boards charged with making this ultimate judgment and deciding what should be moved forward. Again, it ultimately comes down to not just a town meeting vote, but to an election to vote into whether or not to do this. I just think that the annual town meeting, particularly this year, where the annual town meeting is going to be truncated, I think we ought to be stripping our warrant down for June, if we do have a June town meeting, to the bare minimum needed to keep the town operating. And so I almost think it would be kind of a fake public forum, just because you wouldn't have sufficient time to hear all of them. Look, just with our group, we have spent 2 hours and 45 minutes discussing this, and probably at least a third to a half of us came into this with a fair amount of knowledge of it already. And so I certainly think we need to have an in-person public forum. I don't think this is the kind of question that just goes to a plebiscite after 10 or 15 minutes of discussion at an annual town meeting. So I'd be opposed to putting it on the annual, but I do think we need to have something other than this type of discussion before the school committee and the selectmen decide what to advance to the next step.
I'd also have some concern from a warrant committee perspective, because if it's on the warrant, then the warrant committee is going to have a recommendation either way. And if the idea is to take a straw poll, I don't think it really makes a heck of a lot of sense to have the warrant committee tell the annual town meeting what they should be leaning towards one way or the other, if it's just to take their temperature.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm pretty sure that this would not go over well. This would basically be trying to have a vote on the project at PSR at this phase, because effectively that's what it would end up kind of being. And I don't think the MSBA would go for that. And I think practically it would be very difficult to do anyways, because a lot of what Mike was saying, I mean, we just haven't had a chance to really explain the project to people. The only place where we've seen that happen in Wellesley, they were going to have a town meeting this year to basically tell the town meeting what they were doing, but not to get any kind of a vote on it. And that's an elected town meeting too, so it's a little simpler way to communicate, or a representative town meeting.
Mike, is the building committee, on this issue of grade configuration, is the building committee going to come out with a recommendation on which way to go? I understand you want the opinions of all of our committees, and because I knew that was a question, I've been thinking about it before this meeting, and I have a framework that I'm using. I will freely admit it's not a framework that reflects a tenth of the expertise, effort, in depth of analysis that you all have done, but recognizing that was a question on the table, I did go through a process. And I can do that now. I could do that live right now, except that my confidence that I actually am bringing any great valuable thinking into the process is pretty low. You all probably have, if you as a committee have an opinion, and I assume you do, but maybe you don't, I assume you also have a pretty solid rationale to back that opinion. I know, speaking for myself, at least on the Board of Selectmen, it would actually, I won't roll over and play dead. I think most people would recognize that, but I would nonetheless value what you say and why you say it, because right now I'm working with a fairly superficial framework, and I'll tell you what it is. I'm basically saying I don't think the town should take on more debt than the value of an annual budget. And so when I look at what works and what doesn't, and I'm just telling you that it's not because I'm smart or it's good. I'm just saying I needed to do something. I put a stake in the ground and said we shouldn't be taking on more total debt than our annual budget. And I wouldn't follow my sword on it, but that's kind of where I drew the line on the field. So it would help me a lot to actually hear your rationale about what you think should be done, and I'll listen to it for sure. That's how superficial my thinking is right now. So, I think it needs to be better than that.
All right, so I'll try to respond. We as a building committee have not taken any position on this, and actually we're seeking the feedback because we as a building committee should not be setting policy on education, nor are we, truly setting policy in other areas as well. We're really trying to execute the project for the town and get this through the process of these decisions. Ultimately, the school committee and the school administration are charged with making a recommendation of what they think is best for the schools, which is why we have them in attendance. Ultimately, the Board of Selectmen are the town's chief executives. So they need to bring to it a big picture view of everything in the town. And the Warrant Committee represents the financial oversight of the town and making sure that we're not making rash decisions. As we've encountered all of this with a bunch of you that have been through this with me and the building committee before on major capital decisions, we always take a long-term view. And this town has been burned in the past by trying to look short-term and keep dollars down in the short term, and then ended up paying more in the future. For instance, just the DPW, when we were, the project went to vote and it got voted down. We went back, cut the size of the building by 30% and still ended up paying more than the original price, or I believe at least the same amount, by waiting too long. So we try to keep that vision clear despite all the uncertainty out there. But the SBC specifically has not taken a position on this, and because really we're looking for educational benefits of this decision or recommendation to come from others that are charged with that. And as such, also the chief executives and the Board of Selectmen to give us some guidance as to what their feel is. And we're trying to gather as much feedback from the community to help support that decision. We provide the data. If you tell us, what's the difference in cost, what's the difference in schedule, we can happily provide that data, but I don't believe that we're the body that should necessarily be the ones to come out in the forefront and recommend the actual configuration. I don't know if that helps at all, and I welcome any feedback or difference of opinion from the building committee.
I agree with your points, basically, that the school committee needs to tell us what they feel is the best. And I think if it passes a judgment around its reasonableness, and I think this does about the grades, the 3 to 5, I think it's our job to find the right solution and the most efficient and cost-effective building to do that. That's my opinion. And we do need the support. This project will need the support of the selectmen inherently, just to get it through a town vote. And same thing with the warrant committee. So I think it's a kind of a collaborative effort, but largely the decision around grade configuration, I think, is a school committee decision.
So my comments tonight have not been to argue or push for an outcome, but it has been to try to share at least my personal perspective on this. And where my comments to you, Mike, are more, I want to make sure I'm listening to all the arguments as carefully, including the arguments that might be going in the opposite direction of where I'm leaning through the process I'm using. Where I'm trying to be mindful of is the burden that's going on taxpayers. I think we have not been mindful enough of that over several years, and there's implications that are already making themselves known. And there's a good chance in this coming year, given what disruptions we have now, if anything, the pressures are worse. We've asked them to lean forward in the saddle for the DPW garage, lean forward in the saddle for the safety building, both times because the interest rate environment justified. I think it was the right thing to do. We've asked them to lean forward to help dig out on the OPEB funding. We've asked them to approve the capital override for facilities. And we were pretty close to asking them to approve another $1 million for a stabilization fund for capital equipment. And all of these things are asking today's taxpayers to fill in the hole that the town as a whole has kind of dug by making short-sighted financial decisions. I bring that up not to argue against where we're going here, but I'm bringing it up because when I look at the total cost of the projects, I'm keeping all of that in mind when I kind of look at my own view of what we should or shouldn't do. But before I just use that as my sole basis, it's helpful to hear the arguments for why, whatever people think we should do, regardless of price, it helps me to hear the rationale because I want to hear it, because I have a feeling it will take some work to include the support of the Board of Selectmen to convince taxpayers, I'll say yet again, to step up and support something that's maybe costing them money that they don't get a lot of fun out of.
Well, I would just add that it may not always be fun, but sometimes it's necessary. And this town, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. I'm not speaking as chair of the SBC, but this town leans heavily on its school system and is prideful of its school system. And I personally want to support that school system because it's one of the major things that makes this town great. It's one of the major reasons why people move to this town. It's one of the major reasons why property values continue to rise. Neglect of the school system or further delay of a potentially very important project for the town could have some other negative impacts, and not just looking at it from a price tag perspective. So I just want to be able to personally, I support the project. I'm agnostic on the grade configuration. I look to the school committee and the superintendent for that guidance. But the project I support fully because I think it's critical to the infrastructure of this town and what makes this town great. So I don't want to look at this as just the price tag. I know it's a big one. I recognize that. I recognize it's a big burden. And I recognize the uncertainty we've been placed in. So these are all points that are true to my heart, Gus. I appreciate where you're coming from. But again, I try to keep a long-term perspective. And I think trying to make sure that the schools are successful and well-supported is critical to the future of Medfield. So that's my 2 cents. And then I'll open it up.
Yeah, Mike, if I could make just one quick point on that long-term issue, and it'll harken back to something I said earlier, Gus, and that is this, that if we do go, putting aside whether we accept the entirety of the population estimates as to the size of the school building, putting aside whatever bells and whistles are going to be on there that also affect the overall cost, if we do stick with a grade 4 and 5 configuration, we also have to factor in whatever the cost of that building is, plus the inflation factor for the next 15 years. We're going to be telling the town in 15 years, you've got to build another building just like it, because you're going to have to replace the Wheelock School with a full-on 2-grade school in 10 to 15 years, because that building is on its way out. And so you will then be paying the debt service on this building and the debt service on replacement Wheelock. To me, one of the biggest advantages of the 3, 4, 5 configuration is that it leaves open the possibility 10 to 15 years from now that instead of building a whole new Wheelock School, we build an addition to Memorial, and we have 2 elementary schools. And we just decide that carrying 3 elementary schools is too expensive. We'll have a better idea of what the school population is going to be like 10 to 15 years from now. I suspect it's going to be closer to what I think it's going to be than what the projections are. But whoever's right about that, it gives us greater flexibility down the road to reduce our overall capital commitment. Because if you're thinking then beyond that Wheelock building, well, 15 years from now, you're then coming up on the high school and the middle school being 35 years into their renovation. And so one of the reasons we are in this capital deficit that we've been trying to dig our way out of is frankly not stuff that was done in 2010 or 2011 in the DPW building. It was stuff that was done in 1970, 1975. in building buildings that didn't last as long as they should have. Right? We should not have had to build a DPW building in 2010. We should not have had to build a public safety building in 2015, but we had to because their predecessors were inadequate. And so I think if we look from a long-term perspective, putting aside, whatever the marginal benefit is of the 3-4-5 versus 4-5 from the educational perspective, that view may change, right? 15 years from now, the viewpoint may be you're better off with 2 grades than 3 from an educational standpoint. Fine. But if we stay with the 2-grade configuration, that locks us into the current layout pretty much permanently, because we will not be able to reduce our overall building footprint at any point in the near future if we stick with the current configuration.
So Mike, my only comment to that specific point is I'm not and y'all probably get fired up on this. I'm not taking the decision to put that burden on today's taxpayers quite as lightly as you are. It's just possible that taxpayers 15 years from now should be the ones to pick up that burden, because we, the taxpayers of the last 10 years, have picked up the burden of a 50-year DPW building, a 50-year public safety building. And incidentally, none of my comments here are a comment about whether or not the school project should go ahead. It's all comments around what's the reasonable cost of a school project at this point in time under the current circumstances. So this is not, is there a school project here or not? It's a question of what kind of school project. I'm not sure that maybe taxpayers 15 years from now shouldn't pick up some of these burdens, as we've signed up for some of the overrides that we've asked taxpayers to sign up for today.
So I would also add that when looking at the overall, let's call it the life cycle cost of the building, often, we make decisions based on just initial cost, but the significant portion of the life cycle cost, it has to do with debt service. And so we always try to, as much as possible, time these as best we can based off of appropriate times to be borrowing money. Because the difference between borrowing 10 million in 2020 versus borrowing 10 million in 2017, is significant and far more than, quite honestly, some of the numbers we're throwing around having to do with the decision on grade configuration. So the interest rate environment certainly is favorable. We hope it stays that way for at least to the time frame that gets us to a point where we actually have a successful vote and borrow the funds. So, as we sort of think long term, these are windows of opportunity to fix some sins of the past and hopefully set up the future of the town to not have to make similar sins in the future. That's my opinion.
So Mike and Tim, just because you guys do this for a living, is there any risk with MSBA with all this? I mean, obviously it'll give us that delay if we need to have it, but is there any risk of MSBA pulling any support for this project? I mean, what is the risk around that?
None that I see. Tim, I don't know if you want to chime in.
No, there isn't any.
Okay.
I mean, the grant, I haven't read it, but the grant has like we will be within the timeline of the grant feasibility agreement.
Right.
Even with this extension. I mean, if it got much longer, it would be different, but.
And who knows if they even grant any further.
Yeah, they could. Yeah.
They're going to have to factor something in for these COVID delays, because every town that's in the system right now is impacted by this. And
there's no risk though about that. Guarantee
okay,
that.
Thank you.
Have the schools and the school committee made a recommendation on the grade configurations?
Anime.
We haven't. Tomorrow, Thursday, we have a school committee meeting, and grade configuration is on the agenda, but we're not voting then. But all our data that Jeff presented, we've fully digested all that, and I suppose we are still coming back to it, open to any suggestions. If you folks don't feel like we have enough information, what else do we, what else do we need?
Again, I think we have to talk a little bit here about what elected officials are supposed to do, which is listen to our constituency. And I believe that we have heard both informally and formally from our constituencies that they feel very strongly about this project. And that I don't think anybody doubts that the Dale Street School needs to be replaced. Now, when we have looked at the ways that, as some of the data that Jeff presented earlier, there are really significant advantages at this point to a 3-4-5 school educationally. Again, we are going to discuss that on Thursday, and there are any number of options. But I also am very concerned about a lot of the discussions I'm hearing about essentially doing kind of a doodle poll for making our decisions as a town. It does take taxpayer commitment. I don't think, though, that being short-sighted or looking at the immediate cost is what we are supposed to do as elected officials. We have to understand that there is a longer term and that this is an awful time. I don't think anybody thinks that is not true, but we have to truly be the people who look longer term, because we have to be able to digest this information in a way that is not as emotional as what an immediate decision would be. And to Gus's point about whether we decide to take on debt that is more than our annual budget, it seems arbitrary to me, not because I don't value Gus's opinion. I do very much, actually. It's that's making a decision in the short term around our current budget that is not looking at what we need to do in 50 years. I agree with Mike Marcucci that if we're just looking at locking ourselves into the same educational system that we've had for the, since the 80s, by insisting that we have, these 3 school buildings, or that we're locking ourselves into 4 or 5, then we're not doing our job. We might as well kind of just put all of this out and not spend this time that we spend discussing, right? We need to get community buy-in in a way that people feel like they have the specific data that they need to trust that we're doing our best to make decisions. And we do have town meetings that basically kind of put a hard stop, right? Or a hard go on what we do. But in the meantime, it's important for us to truly be figuring out whether we are able to tell a long-term story here and a long-term understanding of what our town needs, which I think property values and the culture of our town is enormously important in this. And I think that when we look at the cost between a 3-4-5 or a 4-5 over the course of 50 years or 70 years, we will find that de minimis, much as when we look at the cost of a memorial renovation right now and what we chose to do when we did renovate it, as opposed to what we kind of wish had happened, then we will regret decisions that are made on very small amounts of money over a very long period of time. I also want to bring back that there is a benefit in that the MSBA will reimburse much more quickly than they have previously. And having that reimbursement, from what I understand, and I'd like the Warrant Committee to weigh in on this, having that reimbursement once again in our coffers makes our town look as though we are able, and much as we have been using the MSBA reimbursement money for multiple years to make it look as though our cash reserves really kind of back up our ability to handle debt. Again, there's
Jess, I
MSBA.
just want to chime in on that.
Is that going to work that way?
No, it's
not
it's
this
very
time.
Not this
different.
time.
Essentially, now what you only borrow what the town needs, and so there's not this. They wait until the end and send you a big fat check.
Okay, so they'll,
It's gonna work differently. Yep.
okay, so that in that they, okay, so that's not the case. But in the meantime, we really are looking at long-term as opposed to short-term kind of understanding, even within the 10 years, right? And so I know that these are hard decisions. And I know that right now we're all sitting in our houses and figuring out what our Zoom background is going to be. But it is contingent upon us as people who have been elected to think in a longer term way. And I think that that's something that we have to think about. And I know that we're all trying.
Jess, I'd like
But
to
I
jump
think I
in there
need to
real
do that.
quick if I could.
Yeah.
So luckily, no one chose to elect me, and me and the warrant committee are the unelected officials, and you know, while I
Appointed by an elected official.
I mean, we could go down all sorts, and now all of a sudden the entire town's deputized. But that's really only to say that, yeah, I'm not registering opinion one way or the other on this, but I will say that the warrant committee is going to be looking at the budget as it affects the town now, because I believe that's what we're tasked to do.
Right.
So, you know, whatever the elected officials here are supposed to do philosophically or otherwise, we will be taking a hard look at the budget as it exists today.
Of course, but that's the checks and balances, right? That the warrant committee is charged with looking at what happens now, but as elected officials, we also have to think about the long term.
So Jess,
I think,
can I respond as well?
Please.
Before you do that, Gus, I think we're going to be reaching a breaking point in terms of time here. I would like to have the warrant committee chime in a little more because I don't think they've done as much if they so choose speaking. And then I do want to spend a few minutes just opening it up to the public before it gets too late. So Gus, I'll let you ask your question, and then I'd like to move to my.
Just 2 minutes at most. Jess, first, your comment about my arbitrary cost, the budget. Absolutely, that's totally arbitrary. And the reason I shared it was so you could totally appreciate how arbitrary my thinking is when I was asking for the rationale. I just had to put a stake in the ground, and that's where I put it in coming into this meeting. So correct. There's one thing I disagree with you on. It actually does lead to a question, which is at what point does the rationale that we're planning for the long term fall apart when you use it to justify spending? I didn't move to this town for the schools. It turned out they had very good schools. We moved here before MCAS came, and if anything, I get totally aggravated by people who come and say they moved to the town for the schools with a tone of voice like there's a concierge service here who's grateful that they came here to grace us with their presence. I'm actually really tired of people saying they came for the schools. The real estate prices will not go up forever. Right now we have tax rates that are going up higher. We're one of the highest tax rates because of our tax base. And that won't continue. And the town that I want to preserve is not just a town that's so affluent, it takes money out of its back pocket to pay for stuff without thinking about it. The town that I came to actually was a town because of a lot of people who, if you really get down to it, are reasonably modest of means and put a lot of time and effort into the town. And those are some of the people that I see moving out. And that's what's bothering me right now. I'm not saying that we need to really tighten the screws down on everything, but not being aware of who they are and not feeling the people that don't have virtually unlimited money to put into taxes are the people that I'm worrying about right now, because I've seen there are other towns here in this state
that have been changed by people who came in because of the schools, who then basically said, hey, that's all that matters is keep the schools up on whatever it takes. And those towns they don't stay the towns they were when people first started moving in. So slight philosophical difference there, and I'll shut up.
Actually, Gus, I look forward to the day that you and I do the Gus and Jess Dog and Pony Show. we should totally go on the road, because quite often I think we are more on the same page a little bit than you think.
When the high school was first proposed, it got shot down by the taxpayers, and a year later, one of the seniors that led the opposition the first year was the first one to speak in favor of the redesign project. So there are times when the towns may,
I like the history lessons and all, but it's getting kind of late. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move on. Mike Pastore, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to have your 2 cents. I know you guys have listening intently, but if you or your committee have some further comments before I open it up to the public.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking it all in at this point. I think that's that's our role in the process right now. I haven't gotten pinged by any of my committee members in a while, but if anyone does have anything to say, Newton, Bob, Jeremy, Sharon, Christine.
And please do reach out or
I think we're good.
If you need further information. Obviously, there's a lot more to come, but anything specific, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So with that, given the hour and the patience that we do have a good amount of participants, actually more than our in-person meetings. So I don't know what that says about digital meetings, but it appears we have 10 members of the public. So I would ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to allow 1 question per participant, given the time frame and the evening, and then we'll close the meeting. So we'll give you a minute if you want to just type in any questions through the Q&A button at the bottom. So not the chat button. I see Chris Potts, I see you putting a bunch of stuff in the chat. If you would just throw it in the Q&A section, if you don't mind. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, given that this may take a while, I'm going to unmute Chris McHugh Potts. I know she has questions. Try to keep it to the most important one, Christine, and then I'll open it up to further members of the public. So,
Can you hear me?
Unmuted, and we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
What's the timeline for MSBA to respond with its comments to the recent submission?
The PDP?
Yes, sorry, I was blank.
I know it's alphabet soup. So typically they take 3 weeks to submit their response. Again, given the situation we're in, who knows? Hopefully it means they've got more time at home to sit and review these packages, but typically it's 3 weeks time frame that they have to respond.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then the town will have 2 weeks to respond to those comments.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So, so I'm going to make a motion to adjourn the SBC meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, so we do a roll call vote. Mike Quinlan in favor. I'm going to run down the list. Tim Bonfatti.
In favor.
Walt Kincaid.
In favor.
Mike Weber.
In favor.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Shea Brooke,
Yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes.
and Mike Marcucci.
Yes.
All right, I'll turn it over to Gus Murby of the Board of Selectmen.
We're actually staying on, Mike, after this is done.
Oh,
So we're
that's
not,
all
we're
right.
not
So-
adjourning. Yeah.
So, sorry, I forgot about that. School Committee, Anna Mae O'Shea Brooke.
I move to adjourn the school committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, second.
Second.
I'll take a roll call vote. Jess Riley?
All right, who was on the second? If you could just say your name.
Who's
Riley was on the second.
Thanks, Jed.
And Jess Riley.
Yes. Okay, Leo?
Aye.
Megan Glenn?
Aye.
Tim Knight?
Aye.
Thank you.
Mike Pastore.
Warrant Committee, do we have a positive motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Sharon. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jeremy. Bob Sliney.
Bob has moved.
Newton Thompson.
Yes.
Jeremy Marset. Sharon Catro.
Yes.
Christine Barden.
Yes.
Mike Pastore, yes.
All right, I just wanted to say the Board of Selectmen are going to continue on, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. I know this has been a marathon session and we appreciate you being flexible and taking the time. And I hope everybody stays safe and healthy out there.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Ciao, folks.
And I believe, Christine, you are now host.
I am now host and in control.
All right. Take care, everybody. Signing off.
For all those members of the public that want the really fun meeting, just stay tuned. The selectmen are getting warmed up.
You see my Chuchi's in the closet. Walking.
Oh, yeah. This is the wall. Okay. Second. Okay, we're good.
We're close enough. Yep. Let's see, who called this meeting? Chris.
I did. I just have a couple of things that have come up in the last few days. I'll run through them really quickly. The first one is parents of the senior class have got some very creative ideas that they're working on. And if it's okay with you, if you can authorize me to work on those with them. I don't want to lay them all out here because some of them are a surprise to our seniors. But I'll be working with the chiefs on both of those ideas.
Any comments, Pete, Mike?
No, just to clarify, these are the seniors in high school, not the senior citizens of Medfield. Yeah.
Correct, but I'm willing to work with them too on this.
The seniors don't usually need the public safety officers to sit there and review their plan.
Nor their parents.
Right. So we, okay, you're working with the safety community here to make sure everything works right.
Absolutely. The second one that has come up.
You need a formal motion to authorize you, just want to know.
I think just an agreement that you can authorize me, that's fine. I don't think you need a formal.
I'm okay with it.
The second issue is we've had several photographers reach out to us and they're all interested in doing this movement called front porch photos. I actually don't think that we have any jurisdiction. They're private people inviting a photographer to come to their house. They've all agreed to do social distancing, but they've all asked for support and permission from the Board of Selectmen.
Just out of curiosity, are they photographers here in Medfield or are they coming from other towns?
There are some in Medfield and some from other towns.
So the more the merrier, I guess, is what we're saying. The only reason I asked the question is, all things being equal, I'd favor the photographers in Medfield that could use the help over other towns, but.
Yeah, I think it's up to everybody's individual choice of who they want to choose as a photographer, but.
I thought the one that I saw was a Medfield person, Gus. Your sound just became much better, by the way.
Really? I haven't done anything. Good to hear.
The next one, I don't know if you need to take a vote on this because I think you need to actually talk to Jean to flesh out this idea a little more. But Porch Fest was originally scheduled for May 2nd. They have postponed it. I believe they're looking at a date of September 20th in the fall. But they would like to do kind of a drive-by Porch Fest where they would have individual homeowners with musical acts set up around town, and then people would know where to drive to see those. But I wouldn't be doing enough justice. Jean probably really needs to speak to you, and I'm going to recommend that we meet next Tuesday anyway. So I'll invite her to talk to you about it. But she's really anxious to start her planning for this. So if you have any initial feedback, if you can let Chief Garrett or I know, we're trying to work with her on this.
I think the caution from the chief was requires us to hold off this week anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, the only piece that so clearly getting the endorsement from the chief is important. I had a hard time getting my arms wrapped around the concept in the sense that the locations should be somewhere far enough off the beaten path that you're not interfering with traffic, but then not so far off the beaten path that people will stop. And I was trying to figure out how to reconcile that. I would make one comment. I think doing anything out in front of the transfer station for the foreseeable future is a really bad idea.
Agreed.
Unless you're trying to entertain the line of cars waiting to get in. Maybe it's a good idea, but we ought to take that into account. We don't need more complexity at the transfer station right now.
No, we're having enough issues, especially on a Saturday.
Okay.
So if it's okay with you, I'll invite Jean to come in, but if you think you have any issues along the way, let me know and I can have her prepared to talk about it next Tuesday. And then the last request, John Thompson would like to request $14,000 to do some boarding up of the old MEMA building. He's concerned there's been some recent activity up there and he'd like to get it boarded up as soon as possible.
Any comments on that, Mike?
I think that it makes sense to listen to what John Thompson is telling us. He's there all the time. I went up there last night. He was there checking on the kids. He's just there all the time. So he's really the face of the town there.
It's kind of my reaction. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I assume this is within our budget and the money we have and all the rest of it for MSH. I mean, we shouldn't. The alternative is just to let the building sit open and fall further apart and have people wandering around in there, which is probably not great.
It's the Army truck.
We do.
Really?
We do.
Do we? I assume we own the trailer out front too.
Yes. Yeah.
The Army truck used to come to Medfield Day, I remember. I don't know if it gets started more than once a year.
Does it run?
Not currently. Yeah, it's not operational right now, which is why it's unfortunately gonna have to stay in the spot it's in for a little while.
You can't mount a water tank on it with some hoses and a ladder?
I'll make that recommendation.
Yeah, bring it up, Christine. Just let the trial balloon go up.
Those are the only things, but I do need a vote on the boarding up work at the state hospital.
So moved.
I second.
All those in favor? We got to do a roll call. All right.
Mr. Murby?
Aye.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Peterson, yes.
Okay, done.
No, hold on one second. Chris Hugh Potts would like to speak about the Porch Fest.
Okay.
No need. I just thought if you had any specific questions, I could probably help answer them.
I think we were just looking for Jean to come in to make the full presentation on it.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris, from my standpoint, the only, if you just heard what I said to the folks here, it was trying to picture I was trying to picture how the flow was going to work if people are going down, side streets or something. I don't see that as a major danger. On the other hand, part of what Jean had said was that she was picking locations that it wouldn't be easy for people to stop at. So it's like when you get to the, more severe side streets, it's easy to stop. If you go to the busy streets, it's not easy to stop, but it's also not always a good idea to have a distraction. So I was trying to just picture how you trade those things off, that's all.
Yeah, I think it was the trade-off of the social distancing factor. If you had sidewalks, you could risk people gathering to stand and listening to people performing versus driving by in a car. So I don't know how you control one or the other. I think that's the predicament.
I started wondering whether it would be better off, for example, to see if St. Edward's would let the performers use the St. Edward's parking lot with the understanding that nobody could park there. They could only drive, but it would get them off the road. If we used the McCarthy Park loop or, you know, something like that. And it's, I don't know the right answer. It's all public safety, which is why I would trust Chief Garrett to figure that out.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Did you have meeting minutes too that you wanted to go through, Christine, or?
No, I've been, since technically you don't need a vote to approve them, I've been taking all of your comments and posting them so we can get them up there as soon as possible, especially since our last month's meeting has all been on Zoom.
Great, okay. In that case, the only one that I would suggest, Pete, you in particular, I made some significant, I probably should have, if I know we weren't going to vote, I probably could have just copied you all. I sent my final comments to Christine, but I appended them to what you guys had done first. So I just so she had a single document. The only one that I actually kind of wanted you to look at, Pete, was the March 3rd minutes, because I had revised the description of the Energy Committee's presentation. My intention was to revise it in a way that made it more accurate and complete, but knowing that you are on that committee and you have an interest in those issues, that's the only thing that I did to any of the minutes that I thought you ought to, it was important for you to see to make sure that what I did made sense to you.
I think I took a look at those already and I don't remember having any issues, but I'll take a specific look at that again, March 3rd, okay?
March
Yep,
3rd.
and I can send out the new revision that Gus sent me this evening.
Yeah, if you do the other ones, I always do. All I do is when I start looking at the minutes, I make a copy for myself with GM comments in the name, turn red marks on. And if I find anything, I just make the changes as I'm reading it. And if they're significant, I send Christine that file. Otherwise, I just dump it. So it's kind of just the way I review the minutes. I think
that's all I had. There were just a few things tonight, and I will schedule us for a meeting for next Tuesday.
Okay.
Very good.
Excellent.
No further business. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Murphy, Mr. Marcucci.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Take care.